the enemy, they had driven a vehicle-borne IED through the gate. So they drove a V-bid through the gate, detonated it, killed like 30 Iraqi police officers, Iraqi army soldiers. And we find one of these guys, and they're kind of milling about, and it's like, it just doesn't fit right. Ended up getting U.S. forces onto that vehicle. They had a shootout, killed the driver, approached the vehicle, and discovered that this is a massive IED.
Joe, thanks for showing up today, and thanks for doing this.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Appreciate it. Let's start with the beginning. Tell me your name and just give me a little of your background, where you grew up and stuff.
Okay, so my name is Joe Priester, Joseph. Grew up in Bondurant, Iowa, which is, about 20 miles to the northeast of Des Moines. Small farming community. Actually, I live in a town just like it. Town of like 3,000 people, a graduating class of like 75 kids. So pretty small, and revolves around, it really does revolve around, the traditional great American values. So where I live now is exactly how I grew up, pure coincidence. That born in another farming community called Algona, Iowa, near the Minnesota border. The only real military we have in our family was my grandfather served in World War II. My grandmother was, I think she was a wave. And then it was me. And
what's that?
A wave? I think it's like the Women's Auxiliary Volunteer, and it's a shame that I don't know the entire abbreviation, but they both served in their own right, especially during that time period.
How did you end up? Did you want to join the military your whole life, or what's that?
I did. From the very beginning, I'd always want to be military, and back in the 80s, there was this cartoon called G.I. Joe, and how silly this sounds. That was probably the foundation of the military being imposed to me, 6, 7, 8 years old, or however exactly how old I was. That was probably the biggest foundation. But I do remember my grandfather going to, the VFW a couple of times. It really wasn't a major event, for me, but the military was always there. And of course, the greatest generation, they don't even talk about their service. They're just, I was there, but yet the guy could be, this massive war hero, and he'll never talk about it. So it's kind of the same way. My grandfather he never really discussed those type of things, and my mom never asked. So when he did die, there was a lot of questions to be answered, and not a whole lot of answers.
Which theater was he in, your grandfather?
The European theater. And he was in the postal service portion of the Army, and he was there for 4 years.
Okay, so give me your you graduate high school, and then what happened?
Sure, I graduated in 97. Always wanted to be in the military, so I didn't even have to worry about college or SATs and ACTs, and I didn't care. It was not a factor. I was probably a ABC student, nothing great. Played sports, played baseball, wrestled. And in 96, went to the Air Force recruiter because I'd always wanted to be a pilot. I always, it's the Air Force or the Navy for pilots. But, the more experienced I became, the more we discovered that's not true, of course. But I joined the Air Force and went in as an Airman First Class, which is an E3. Upon graduating basic training, and of course wasn't on track to become a pilot, but I became an enlisted air crew member, graduated basic training. Actually, I spent my 19th birthday in Air Force basic training, so that was a great birthday gift. And on graduating basic.
Where was it?
The only Air Force basic training is in San Antonio, Texas, at Lackland Air Force Base. And pretty darn hot,
what was that
especially
like?
in the middle of the summer. The Air Force basic training it continues to evolve, like all training should. But when I was there, it was a lot of DNC, which is drill and ceremony, a lot of marching around. Of course, you had, training. This is the Air Force, but I think we shot the M16 like once. And, it's just not that type of, that service continues to evolve, but at that time, it's significantly a support branch of service, with the exception, of course, the pilot side of it or the aircrew side of it. And when graduated basic training and continued through the pipeline for becoming an enlisted aircrew member. So in the enlisted side at the time, only about 2% of the enlisted community became a crew member. Most of them were maintenance or some other job, some other support function. So 2% of the enlisted force is extremely small. And I was an airborne communications specialist, and essentially what I did was troubleshoot and set up communications equipment. And the airplane I flew on is the E3 Century AWACS aircraft. So it's a large, 4-engine Boeing 707 airframe with a disc on top. It looks like a flying saucer that's attached to the airframe, but it was a radar. And it's very, very conventional weapon system, something for, a large force on force type of war. And very passive, no offensive capability, and honestly, very minimal defensive capability. But the radar could see so far away. The unclassified range, last I knew, was 300 miles away. So the airframe didn't have to be close to it didn't have to be close to the fight to be a significant role player in the battle space. And I did that. I was in the Air Force for 6 years, 97 to 2003, and that was my job.
Were you in any conflicts with that plane? Or was there?
Well, there was Operation Northern Watch and Operation Southern Watch. So flying out of Turkey and flying out of Saudi Arabia to look over the southern no-fly zone and the northern no-fly zone of Iraq, because this is post-Gulf War, and also post-Kosovo, which I did not go to Kosovo, or not post. Some was post and some was pre-Kosovo, but I did not go to Kosovo because I think Kosovo was like 99. But I didn't deploy there, but I did Operation Northern Watch, Operation Southern Watch, and then a few other, exercises, and nothing like, the global war on terror year-long deployments, but, small 2-3 month long deployments. I'm not going to say they're inconsequential, but my position was a complete support role for the officers in the back who were making decisions and who were gathering intelligence and passing that to the correct agencies, whether it's a fighter pilot or some ground agency. But honestly, a lot of the first 20 minutes after takeoff, extremely busy. And then after that, if nothing broke, I'm back there, reading a book, monitoring systems, making sure everything is good to go. So, and then it's frantic the last 20, 30 minutes, shutting everything down, ensuring, because I also loaded the cryptographic equipment. So I had to obviously have accountability of all of that top secret equipment. And that honestly, that's kind of the way it was.
How long was a typical flight mission?
So a training flight was anywhere from 8 to 12 hours. And then of course they're long. It can be pretty miserable. And then of course at the front end, you're going to have, your briefings and get into the aircraft and pre-flight. And then of course at the end of the flight, especially since mine was kind of a technical position, I would go with the other technical positions on the airframe to the maintenance folks and debrief if there was any problems. And so there was probably a solid 2 hours on the backside. So you're looking at anywhere from a 14 to an 18-hour long day.
Wow.
And that's just a normal stateside training mission. I deploy in this capacity. I also deployed to Operation Enduring Freedom, and Iraqi Freedom. And I also supported Operation Noble Eagle, which was protecting our own skies after 9/11 occurred. And so we would be doing aerial surveillance, even after the immediate events of 9/11, we would still be conducting those operations and continuously, surveilling our own skies to make sure nothing else was, a threat.
Did you enjoy doing that?
Not at all. It was my personality didn't suit the airframe or the mission. And because I'm more of a hard charger, more of a I get, I mean, I'm not, of course, I'm not a special operator, but I'm a warrior, hands down. And that, and I mean, the American service member has been attacked, since many, many times since World War II. But this is the first time we've been attacked on our own soil since World War II. So there is no way in hell I was sitting out a shooting war, none. So I was just kind of biding my time and trying to find other avenues within the Air Force to be more on the tip of the spear, because this certainly was not, and it was such a completely passive weapon system where we're just gathering information and transmitting it. It was just not what I wanted to do. And then during selection for what airframe you were going to do your job on, because there was the airborne communications job is probably on 5 or 6 different airframes. I absolutely wanted to be either a boom operator, which would have been a different job entirely, but still an aircrew member, a boom operator on a refueling aircraft, or a some sort of crew member on the AC-130 gunship. But things. The older I get, the more I realize there's a plan, and I'm just along for the ride. So sometimes you just have to go and do what you're doing at the time, and those different doors will open up later, and you'll figure out that, yeah, that would have been cool to do, but I'm glad it didn't happen, because this would not have happened, and this did happen. So, and I relay those things to my kids, who probably are like, yeah, whatever, dad, but they'll figure it out later when they're 50. So, they'll figure it out. They don't like
That's
to
true.
listen.
That's an old man thing to figure out.
It is. But once we figure out, we just want to pass that knowledge to everybody to just make life so much easier. But the kids are kids.
It's like riding a bike. You can't explain that. Somebody has. Well, it's that kind of advice. You don't learn it by somebody telling you. You have to figure it out yourself.
No, you're 100% right. Absolutely.
One thing about that plane. So when it's out flying, is it flying solo, or does it have a support
by itself
planes with it, or no?
No,
it's by itself.
No, it won't have it will not have fighter coverage. I mean, if there was a threat, let's say an Iraqi MiG-25 or something like that was posing a threat, of course, the officer controllers in the back would, be vectoring those, let's say F-15s or whatever airframe is out there, be vectoring that asset to protect ourselves, which, and at that time, we're going to be retrograding. We never retreat. We always retrograde. U.S. forces do not retreat. We retrograde. And, we would retrograde out of the area while that fixed-wing aircraft took care of the problem. But we were always by ourselves.
During that time, do you have any stories that are unusual, or that you thought were interesting or scary or funny?
Not really.
Was it pretty boring?
It was very boring. And I mean, for some people, that's right up their alley, and that's totally fine. I would never disparage anybody for saying that. I loved it. That was the best 20 years of my life. Great. That's just wasn't for me. But no, unfortunately, professionally, nothing really exciting happened. I had a couple opportunities, but unique opportunities where I was able to go through the U.S. Army's basic airborne course, the jump school. I was able to do that, and then I also had the opportunity to go through the U.S. Air Force air traffic control course, which was leading into more aviation side of me. That was the first time in my life where things had to be committed to memory and verbatim, and that. I guess I'd probably be about 22, 23 years old, and an average student. It was an eye-opening experience, because it required continuous study. But that really laid the foundation for me becoming a pilot later, because once you kind of train your brain how to memorize things verbatim and perfectly as you see it in the book, it makes it easier to learn and memorize other things. So that was really the foundation for later going to flight school, making flight school a lot easier. The air traffic control course was really important, and the airborne course was just really fun. So
how old were you when 9/11 happened?
I would have been 23. I was actually at the air traffic control course at Keesler Air Force Base, and so we were going through the course, and we were already in class, and of course 9/11 happened, and they locked the building down, locked the base down, and really couldn't couldn't even leave the base, or I'm sorry, leave the building. So no chow, no, of course we had the facilities and we had water, but nobody could leave. Everybody was locked down. Nobody could get on and off post. Well, at base, since we're talking Air Force, nobody could get on and off the base, and we were just stuck there. Finally, and of course we're talking 2001. There's no iPhones with live feeds and video. Hell, I didn't even own a cell phone or a smartphone. Let's go that route. I did have a cell phone, but we're talking a phone only type device, no camera, nothing.
Right.
But
Right.
but we were locked down, and finally, I was probably towards the dinner time. Probably towards dinner time was when we finally got released, and we're able to go to the chow hall, eat, and then there's TVs in the chow hall, and now we're seeing images of what happened. And right then, and it's funny because my first stint at Keesler Air Force Base, when I was going through the air crew member training, uh, some other airman, some other kid was talking to me and telling me about this warrant officer program to become, a pilot in the Army, and you don't need a degree and all these other things. And I'm like, that's kind of interesting. I kind of put that in the back of my mind. And then when the war happened, I'm like, I am done. I'm out of here, and I'm going to pursue this warrant officer. I didn't even know what it was. I'm going to try to become a warrant officer and be a helicopter pilot, not knowing anything. And that was the goal in life. That's the next objective. And
Wow.
yeah, so it was kind of it's just kind of coincidental that it kind of came full circle at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi. But I continued, I had to finish the ATC program, and then went back to AWACS. And that's of course then when I went to did a deployment to OEF. And I'm mistaken. I did not do OIF, the Iraqi Freedom Operation, aboard AWACS, because they were giving us the smallpox vaccine, and I had a horrible adverse reaction to it, and I was not deployable. The only time in my life I wasn't deployable, because they had to, figure out what the heck was wrong with me. But again, it goes right back to everything happens for a reason. During that time that I missed my deployment, I was able to complete my warrant officer packet and get all the letters of recommendation and do all the academics, the battery of tests I had to do, and do an Army flight physical, and get my packet completed, and it worked out. So it worked out great. And actually, a really funny story. Backing up just a little bit, when I was trying to do the warrant officer program, there is the ability to go do an inter-service transfer. One day I would be in the Air Force at my rank of staff sergeant, and the next day I would be in the Army as a staff sergeant, or E5, and then I would be going straight to candidate school. But when the personnel people in the Air Force had no idea what I was talking about, so I went to a normal Army recruiter who happened to be a former Air Force guy working for the Army as a civilian. This was his retirement job. And even with the other Army recruiters there, I was the first guy that they had ever worked with or to become a warrant officer. So I had, a bunch of chips stacked against me in terms of, yeah. So I'm like, this guy is number one. So we got to figure out how to do this. So they couldn't figure out how to do an inter-service transfer. So what happened was I completed my 6-year enlistment, and got out of the Air Force and joined the Army as just a normal, we call this high school to flight school, a warrant officer candidate. I was separated from the Air Force for 24 days before I joined the Army, and I had to go back to basic training day 0. I left the Air Force as an E5 promotable, so I had the ability to become E6, stay in the Air Force. And, at the time, the re-enlistment bonus was like $35,000 tax-free, which is a lot of money now, let alone, or I guess would have been 2003. And I had my now ex-wife, but my wife at the time was pregnant. So I have all these things where it's like, man, I really probably should just stay in the Air Force, but I'm not. It worked itself out. But I went to basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and I went in August, September, and graduated in October. So very hot, very humid, and it was completely different than the Air Force. So the Air Force, a lot of drill and ceremony, a lot of inspections, a lot of significant attention to detail, because what's the normal enlisted guy doing in the Air Force? They're working on airplanes. So their attention to detail and having to read a manual has to be perfect. But the mission's completely different. So now we go, the basic training was 8 weeks plus a 0 week. And the 0 week is in processing, getting your uniforms, getting put back into the at the time, DOD system. And I'm like, thank God I now have medical insurance again, particularly for my pregnant wife. And unborn son at the time. So that was, and actually they wanted me to go to basic training in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, because I was stationed in Oklahoma at Tinker Air Force Base. And they're like, oh, it'll just be an easy transition just down the road, but it was going to be occurring in like November. And I'm like, no, you guys don't understand. Like, I've got other priorities than getting to basic training. I need to get, or when it's convenient for you, or location, I need to get into the military now. So they were able to accommodate that. But that was also with me.
Did you feel like, was it a little weird going back into the Army? Because you were probably a little more, you had more experience, at least,
yeah,
and a little more mature than everybody else?
100%, because I'd already been, when I left the Air Force, I was an NCO for the last 25 months of my 6-year service. So over a third of my time, I was already an NCO. And so now I'm going to basic training, and I'm not saying I'm like the one only guy that's ever done this, but a drill sergeant is going to be like anybody, any prior service. They're hey, who's got ROTC or JROTC experience? Well, now you're the platoon guide. You're in charge when I'm not around, type of thing. And now I've got this, and this is a real story. Now I've got this knucklehead, JROTC 18-year-old who just graduated high school 2 weeks ago in charge of me. And I'm just like, okay, no problem, because I've been through it. I've been through the game. Shut up and color. Don't look. Don't do anything. You do exactly what you're supposed to do. When we're in line for chow, you don't look around. You look right at the guy's forehead, or to the back of his head, and life's easy. Just do what the heck you're supposed to do, and move on. And so I didn't worry about it. But eventually, so after we got done with our 0 week, went to basic training, our actual training battalion or company. And they kind of like in Stripes, if you ever seen that movie with Bill Murray, one of my favorites. And they're all sitting around, and with Sergeant Holka, and Sergeant Holka basically is like, where are you from? Why are you here, type of thing. And I'm like, well, I'm Joe Priester. I'm from Iowa, and I just left the Air Force. And they're like, oh, National Guard. I'm like, no, I was active duty for the last 6 years, and I just got out 24 days ago. And that kind of stopped them. They asked me, like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, I'm going to candidate school to be a pilot. After that, they didn't do anything to me. Nothing. I was just this guy that they're just trained, checking the box, because most people aren't in my position. So once again, the drill sergeants aren't asking for that particular category. They just want that ROTC and JROTC guy to, figure out who's going to be in charge. But but after that, they're pretty hands off, but so much so that they also shifted a lot of their own responsibilities to me. Because back then you had to polish boots, make beds, clean the bathroom, the latrine. Well, they're just like, hey, Priester, teach him to do that stuff. And I'm just like, okay. And what am I going to do? Say no? So that's kind of how that went. And, major differences between the Army and the Air Force is I don't recall ever having a uniform or like a barracks inspection in the Army, opposed to having them all the time in the Air Force. And instead of one day of shooting the M16 at Air Force basic training, we were shooting, I think, for like 3 weeks. So, and I could be completely wrong. We're talking, I was in basic training in 2003. So it's been a bit, but unfortunately. And the Army basic training was I was way more geared towards that, way more up my speed, more physical. The academics were fine, no big deal, but the academics aren't nearly as punishing as the Air Force basic training. But the Air Force basic training, they really, instilled that attention to detail. And then there was academics that, you had to take tests, and you in the Army, it was all physical. But it goes right back to, it's a completely different mission, different mindset, different job set. So it just, it needed to be different, and it was, it was a good change of pace for me.
So you enjoyed that. You enjoyed the Army one better.
100%. And the only thing that was that stunk, of course, was I'm in a very oppressive training cycle of being a basic training, and of course, I have a pregnant wife, and so there's other things that I wanted to be doing, but knowing, I have a goal, I have a mission to accomplish, and I'm going to get there, and then life will be normal again.
Did you have with family, friends, were they kind of naysayers about you doing that? Did they think you were crazy, leaving the Air Force to go in the Army? Or
the only person that really was against it was my wife at the time, because and I can't blame her. I mean, trust me, we have our differences, which is why she's my former wife. But I can't blame her, because we're leaving security, we're leaving a normal life, and going and taking this significant risk. Because if I failed flight school, I was at the needs of the Army. So, and now we're in a war, so I'm probably going to be an infantryman. I'm not going to be an officer. I'm going to be, back to being an NCO, or they could actually just be like, we're not even going to retain you. So now I'm out of the military, and being in the military was my lifelong goal. Not too many people get to live their dream. I'm one of the very fortunate ones who get to do that and not have to go through let's say 4 or 8 years of college or anything like that. I was able to go and not have the question mark of what am I going to do after high school. I knew exactly what I was doing, exactly where I was going, and there was no question. And I was able to move very quickly, to my goals and my objectives of life. So I was very fortunate, but my ex-wife was not on board. When it was all finally, said and done, I think she saw the benefits, but it's hard to say things. It's a huge risk. But that was probably one of the very first major rifts that we had in our relationship, which of course continued to manifest itself. But it's a huge risk. She was probably the biggest naysayer, but it was not because she didn't think I couldn't do it. She was just concerned about, how is life going to be one way or the other. So I looking back on it, I totally understand her objective or objections, but my objective was not in line. And I did tell her, I'm like, you can get on board or you cannot, but this is what I'm doing. And, sometimes you have to have those
zeroed
conversations. 100%. I wasn't, there was no way, again, there was no way in hell I was not going to see action in a shooting war that someone else caused, especially on our soil. And how many times have we been attacked? You got Pearl Harbor. Alaska was attacked during World War II, the War of 1812. I mean, how many other times? I'm trying to go, and I have a pretty thorough knowledge of history, and I can't really think of any other times past the Revolutionary War where our soil was directly attacked. So there was no way, because this is a once in a not only lifetime but generational. It really is. It's one of those things where that I was not missing out, and I was not going to be in a support role any longer, which there's nothing wrong with a support role. Sometimes that's right what people want to do. That's as close to the action that they want to be, or that's geared towards their personality, which I will never fault anybody for that. But that was not where I wanted to be. Not at all. And it was not going to continue.
Okay. After basic, what happened?
So then after basic training, I went to Fort Rucker, Alabama for candidate school. And, candidate school was Air Force basic training on steroids. So tons of inspections, lots of drill and ceremony, a ton of attention to detail, because most people, the only warrant officer candidate course or school is at Fort Rucker. So whether you're a special forces warrant officer, you're going there, a pilot, a supply clerk. Believe it or not, the Army has more boats than the Navy. If you're going to be a boat warrant, everybody goes there. So now they're taking all these. Very few are. I know I fell under that high school to flight school program, but very few kids go actually from high school to flight school. Usually they're, maybe a couple years in college, maybe they're a college graduate, but most are NCOs. So they've been in the Army for a while, and they take those skills and they take them to the warrant officer corps and then become more of a force multiplier. And so going to candidate school was at Rucker. Everybody goes there, but there's a lot of like memo writing. There's the officer stuff that most NCOs don't do. And I tell you what, for me, it was difficult because all my NCO time was in the Air Force. And now I'm speaking, it was a language barrier. I'm like, what is happening? I mean, yes, you got some training in the Army, but they didn't teach me how to write memos. They didn't teach me to get to the level I needed to be in the Army level. And the Air Force and the Army, we don't do memos the same. There's a significant difference. Just the language. We don't call, there's no battalions, there's squadrons in the Air Force. Well, what's a squadron? What's a brigade? Okay, now what I'm doing is basically I had to figure out, from the top down, the structure of the level in the Army and the level in the air. So we got a brigade in the Army. Okay, that's a wing in the Air Force. And then a battalion, and now it's a squadron. And okay, so now I'm starting to figure these things out. And we don't have 6 elements. The sixth element is a commander in the Army. So whatever, like one of my troop commanders, whatever they are, it's always a 6, annihilator 6. And once I figured that out, it was like, okay, now this is nothing. It's just basic training on steroids. One kind of funny thing about Canada school is your time is so meticulously planned out throughout the day that you literally have to somehow figure out how to utilize the bathroom in between, a class or this next training event. And it's like, there's not enough time. There really wasn't enough time in the day. Sleeping on top of your bed so that you didn't wrinkle it too terribly. So when you get up, quickly just tighten it. So things like that. It was a challenge. But there was no doubt in my mind that I wasn't going to graduate. I just, once again, had to endure it. But the crummy thing was I had all the holidays in between leaving basic training and going to Canada school. I had Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. So, the military doesn't shut down, but they do go on a Christmas exodus. And that's usually the 2 week, just like school, winter break for the kids, and training stops. So guess what? You're still, you've been there for X amount of days, but they didn't count towards the end of training because you have not completed the training requirements. So instead of uh, I can't remember how long candidate school was. I think it was 7 or 8 weeks also, and it ends up being like 13 because I, had the holidays to get through. But once we grad, we call it $1,000 bar, because after you spend all the money to change your uniforms and go through all the all the changes that you have to do to go from, an NCO or, a junior enlisted soldier to warrant, it costs about $1,000. So we have a lot of car washes to offset that cost and things like that. And it still ends up being about $1,000, and I'm like, best $1,000 I ever spent. And graduated in January 2004, and then flight school's at Fort Rucker, so didn't have too much to do. I just kind of went over to um, the personnel building and signed for a house. And my wife came down at the time and started flight school.
How was that?
Flight school, that's something else. That they call it, drinking from a fire hose, because there's so much information that have to if I was taught it yesterday, I need to know it today. Yeah, there's a little wiggle room in terms of, does it have to be memorized, or do I need a 90% solution to the question or to certain things? But the one things that are never ever, there's no negotiation. We call it, non-negotiable, are the EPs and limitations of the aircraft. So because especially in a helicopter, and especially Army aviation, the altitudes that we're flying at, which are extremely low, you don't have time to pull out a checklist. We're not a fixed wing asset at 30, 40,000 feet where we have minutes to get down, or even, I don't know, the magical ejection button. We don't have any of that stuff. We're riding the aircraft in. So when it comes to emergency procedures and limitations, those are non-negotiable. So we're talking a lot of numbers, a lot of paragraphs, notes, warnings, and cautions. Everything has something different. you know. Um, and then, of course, there's the things that the unwritten rules of what you will also have, memorized and committed to memory without utilizing a checklist or any sort of documentation. The uh, the Army flight school was probably the hardest course I've ever been in, and it it lasted, I guess, a little over a year, I would say. And it's going to be the length is going to be different based on the airframe. The Black Hawk has the shortest flight school. Then it would be the Chinook, and then the Kiowa Warrior, which is what I flew, and then the Apache. The Apache's flight school was only a couple of weeks longer than the Kiowa, and flight school was tough. It was really tough.
What did you first train in? What was the very first thing you flew?
So the first aircraft he flew was the TH-67 Creek. It's a Bell 206 helicopter, two rotor blades. You really had to learn how to fly that aircraft. So the tail rotor didn't have very much authority, so always had to be cognizant of the winds. And coincidentally, my stick buddy was a former Air Force guy, so we were able to kind of meld our minds a little bit and figure this Army stuff out. And I mean, I had never piloted anything until my first flight in flight school. Never been at the flight controls, so there was no preparation. A lot of people would, get their fixed wing certificate as a private pilot, or maybe, have some background in helicopters or anything like that. I had nothing. So once again, my ex-wife had a lot to be concerned about because I'm going on a completely different venture, and we have no idea if I'm going to be successful or not, other than just, you know, hard work and prayer. And the 67 has since been retired, and the Army has a different airframe now, which is very high tech and multi-engine, and not the students aren't quite as, I would say, proficient or where they need to be right now. But the Army is rectifying that, going back to a single engine aircraft, and getting back to those piloting skills. I think over time, over the last decade, they've really realized that a lot of piloting skill had been lost.
Well, describe that very first time you flew it. You soloed it.
Well, so let's go with the first time I flew it. So I, of course, we're taking off from Hanchy Army Airfield, I think, right there at Fort Rucker, and we take off, and I can't. I think I was this. I think my stick buddy was flying with the instructor pilot up front, and I'm in the back, and he's flying, no big deal. He does all of his flying, and then now it's my turn. And what I remember is, number one, hovering is quite possibly one of the most difficult things you can do. Hovering a helicopter, that usually takes about 10 hours of time in the aircraft to learn to find that hover button, we call it, and be able to hover the helicopter. But my distinct memory was my I was so tense, my back was killing me, and so obviously a distraction. But I was just death gripping the flight controls, and of course over correcting, and it was it yeah, it was hard, but with time and with, of course, good instruction and patient instructors, because they know that some of us have never done anything similar to that, so they're pretty patient, and I had a good flight instructor.
Just tell the audience a little bit about why hovering is so difficult, and because my
So
understanding is right, you're controlling both hands and feet are kind of running. You're
correct.
adjusting everything simultaneously. Talk about that.
100%. So your right hand is in what they call the cyclic, the stick that's in between your legs. It's called the cyclic, and that's based because the rotor system is turning, and it's in a cycle, it's in a circle. And then your left hand is going to be on a collective, which is the lever that goes up and down. What that does is it changes the pitches in the rotor system. So more pitch, more gravity of the air. The cyclic allows you to go forward, aft, and then all 360 degrees. And then, of course, your pedals allow you to turn left and right. But you're using all of these at the same time to maintain a stationary position, if that's what unless you want, unless you're taxiing or actually going somewhere. But which is a little bit easier because you have forward momentum. But when you are stationary in a hover, and especially on a windy day, it's very challenging. But so now your hands, your both hands, both feet, and you're moving your head around to make sure you're, maintaining position. And sometimes your head isn't moving, but your eyes are darting around. And of course, you're monitoring your power. So now you're inside on the instrument panel and outside. You're looking all around, and but everything is moving. I'm also a fixed wing pilot, and completely different in terms of, let's say I'm taxiing to one, you don't have to hover, but if I'm going to the runway, you're just on the ground. You're just driving the airplane, for lack of a better word. Super simple. And I will say the biggest challenge, which there wasn't many in airplanes, but the biggest challenge was and I was a instructor pilot in the Army. We learned these things, did some of these, which help us become better instructors. But there's a thing called the law of primacy. So what you learn first, you will always remember, whether it's right or wrong. So it's super important to be taught the right way. Well, as an helicopter, I'm coming in and I'm slowing down to come to, a 2-foot hover and then land. Well, an airplane, you got to keep that speed up, and you're pointed to the ground instead of in a more aft attitude, a pitched up attitude, nose up attitude. You got to keep your airspeed up and keep your, um, you know, pointed to the ground. And so I wanted to continuously get slow. Well, if you get slow, you're not flying anymore. Now you're falling, and you're going to, get hurt at best. So that was the biggest challenge I had when it came to fixed wing. And once I kind of got that out of my system, it was no big deal. But those are the two significant difference. And if you ever have an airplane pilot go to helicopters, they will tell you it's very, very difficult. And then helicopters to airplanes, it'll be the same thing that I'm telling you. It'd be like, it was pretty easy. And when it comes to rules and laws and airspace, 95% of that stuff is the same. So academically, it was really very difficult for me to get through.
So is the throttle just maintained most of the time?
So
It's just
right.
it's the
So
collective and the wow, that's interesting.
So the throttle is going to be connected to the collective, and in my aircraft, other aircraft are different, but in my aircraft and what we're talking about right now, the TH-67, there was a twist grip throttle. So you would advance that when you're on the ground. You'd advance that to 100%, and that's keep bringing the engine and the rotor RPMs to all the RPMs and temperatures to the max. It doesn't mean you're at maximum power, because your collective is going to be adjusting that, but your throttle is to 100%. And then there's either a governor or some sort of computer that's going to maintain the all important rotor RPM. Because when you get too slow, actually, the blades can actually break and then, of course, die. But you want to keep the computer's going to keep that RPM at 100%. So I believe the TH-67 had a governor, which it doesn't matter if it's a governor or if it's a computer, it works the same. So its sole purpose in life is to keep the RPM at 100%. But in my advanced aircraft, the OH-58D Kiowa Warrior, there was a computer, but they also had when it was in the automatic mode, that throttle would be full open, no problem. The computer's monitoring the RPM. But if there was a failure within that system, it would revert to the manual mode. And now I do have to manually turn the throttle to maintain my RPMs and temperatures to where they need to be. So now I potentially could be using both feet, both hands, but one hand is going up and down and twisting the throttle at the same time. And now I'm inside looking at instruments. I'm flying the aircraft. That's extremely demanding. That's very demanding, and we call that manual throttle operations. But we didn't have to do that in the primary phase, which is in the TH-67.
It's a rush to fly a helicopter. It's my
It's
feeling
great.
from talking to
It's great.
pilots.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. It's one of the best things I've ever done in terms of just, as a job, and as in terms of accomplishments. It's just one of those things you'd be like, yeah, I can fly a helicopter, where I have no idea what the percentage would be, but it's significantly lower than people who fly airplanes, not just cost, but because it's challenging. It's really hard.
Was there any experience that stands out in your mind during that training phase that happened with you or any of the other pilots there?
You'd always have guys either getting close to washing out and being able to, pick up their game. And fortunately, and I'm not Chuck Yeager, but I never had those challenges. I was able to, successfully navigate everything. But there would be a guy in class one day and he's not there the next. Um, but in terms of an event that happened in the primary phase, not really. It was pretty straightforward. You would fly, they would alternate every other week. One week you'd be in the mornings, and then in the afternoons you'd go to lunch, and then afternoons you'd be in academics. The next week, mornings is academics, lunch, and then go fly in the afternoon. But me personally, the most significant thing that happened during the primary phase is my ex-wife had my first kid. So now I'm in a new branch of service. I'm in the hardest school that I've been in, and now I'm a new dad, a first-time dad. I think I soloed a few days before the birth, and then a week or 10 days after the birth, I had what we call the P2 check ride, which is your graduating check ride out of that primary phase, and then you move to the instrument phase. So that's obviously, high stress, and uh, fortunately it worked out. But yeah, so that I would say that was the most interesting phase or thing that happened to me during that phase. But no, nothing other than that.
Is it really competitive against everyone in your course there at the same time?
So it's extremely competitive to get into the warrant officer program. Very competitive. I will say that since there's now a war, a real no kidding shooting war, that the gates opened a little bit more. Did not mean it was any less competitive. It just means that they're wanting more pilots. The standard's not
Right.
changing. They're just opening more seats. So the competitiveness is not changing. They just want more people. But when you get into school, and it is very competitive, because the higher you are on the OML, the order of merit list, those are let's say the number one guy, that's the guy who gets to pick whatever aircraft he wants. And as it goes down, the availability of aircraft become less and less. But it goes right back to personality. Some guys, they're number one. Some guys might want to be a Blackhawk guy. Some guys want to be an Apache guy. So you don't know I mean, as you're talking to people, what they want, but how's it going to stack up in the order of merit list? You just don't know until the end. The other factor was your class might not have, and this is where the competitiveness really became significant, is your class might not have all four aircraft available. They might have three or two. And now you're really competing, because I want an Apache. Yeah, I didn't, but let's just say I want an Apache and there's only one. Well, you're not going to know if there's one or 12 until you get to that, you've completed the course. And then it's like, that good thing I'm at the top, because there's only three of X aircraft. But some guys, it goes right back to personality. Some guys want Blackhawk, some guys want uh, the Apache or whatever. I will say, believe it or not, I wanted the Blackhawk because I didn't know any better. As I started, after I selected the Kiowa Warrior, I was like, okay, once again, I was put in the right spot, and I was afforded the right opportunity, and things just fell into place. And it was I looking back, being a Blackhawk pilot is not what I would want to do.
Okay, so what's that story? How did you up in the Warrior then?
So after the primary phase is instruments, same thing, lots of academics, lots of flying. But when that was completed, I can't, there's no way I would be lying if I told you there was X aircraft and where I fell on the OML. I will tell you I was probably in the top 25 or top third of the class. And there was not any, the first couple of guys got the only very few Blackhawks. So I had to pick something else. Did not want a Chinook. And I didn't want the Apache, because now I've been in training now for, you're talking basic training until the end of primary. So I've been in a formal training environment for like a year and a half at this point. So I don't want the Apache because it's the longest training cycle, and I've lost the Hawk, which is also the shortest training cycle. So I'm like, okay, I'll take the Kiowa Warrior. And after learning a few things, I'm like, it looks kind of cool. The mission set sounds cool. We'll do that. And so pure luck, grace of God, however you want to say it. That's exactly what happened. And I've got that. I will probably say I fell into that. I rarely say I fell into anything. Usually it's by hard work, but I fell into that. And that was the best thing that happened to me in Army aviation. opened up a lot of doors and gave me a lot of opportunities.
Never seen that until you talked to us before, and I feel like that's a really cool. Will you talk about what that was and describe it and what its mission was?
So the Kiowa Warrior it's kind of going back in its history. So the Kiowa, from the beginning to the end of its airframe's life, was 45 years. So it started at the very end of Vietnam as a Bell 206, I think B3, and it became the OH-58 Alpha, so A, and then later a C, a Charlie model. They weren't armed. They didn't have the ball on the top, that mass-mounted sight, but towards, I guess it would be towards the first Gulf War in 1990, probably in 89, 88, somewhere in that range was when I would probably say 85, they got the ball, and about 87, 88, they started arming the aircraft. Armed with, you could have a combination of, it depends upon how many, but you could have how you're configuring the weapon systems, but you could have a maximum of 4 Hellfire missiles if you had two-shot rails, one on each side. You could have 2 rocket pods, or 7-shot rocket pods, one on each side, and then the 50 cal machine gun with a maximum of 500 rounds. And in that ball on the top is a thermal imaging sight and a TV camera, and we would use that to kind of pop that ball up over, let's say, a ridge line, and just kind of search and scan and find the enemy. And then when we like to say, we find, fix, and finish the enemy. But the true mission would be to find that grid of the location of the enemy, and then call someone else in to kill it, whether it's artillery, a fixed wing, an Apache. And that's how that mission set was. But we would always fly in a team of 2, and we had nobody in the back, and the back was just black boxes to operate the weapons and the mass mounted sight and things of that nature. So just 2 pilots. And it was a combination of the Bell 206, and I'm trying not to be too technical, but the Bell 206 aircraft and the Bell 407 aircraft. And the Bell 407, which we use, that's one of the best aircraft out there, especially in the EMS industry that I work in now. But so it was far and away the slowest helicopter in the Army, but the most maneuverable, hands down. We could turn on a dime.
What's maximum speed on that?
Well, the V&E, which is velocity never to exceed, is 125 knots. But the only time I'm seeing more than about 105 knots is in a dive, and I'm talking a significant dive. We don't ever approach that. The other thing is we would never fly with doors on. So when we took the doors off, our max speed was, I think, 105. So that we had to be a little cautious of. But it's not like the helicopter's going to fall apart. There's just other aerodynamic impacts that'll occur on the airframe.
Did that pod go on anything else, or was it exclusive to that helicopter?
You're talking about the mass-mounted sight on top of the rotor disc?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that it's just for our airframe, and it can come off. But we would lose that capability, of course. But we would not. We always had it. We never took it off. But it was exclusive to the Kiowa, and on top of Apache. Go ahead.
Did both pilots see? Did you have your own separate image from that, or just the co-pilot or the?
So we had 2 screens in front of us. They're probably about a 5x5 screen, but only the left seater operated that mass-mounted sight. You could see I could see what he was seeing in front of me, but we're so close in the cockpit that our shoulders are touching. And the uniforms we had Velcro on it, and we would be tearing the Velcro off each other because we're stuck to each other as I'm trying to move the collective or something. So I could just look over what he's looking at, because it's 6 inches from me. It's 18 inches from me or whatever it is. I just move and take a look what he's looking at, and we'll be discussing, be like, hey, that looks like, X, Y, and Z. And we'll be having a conversation as I'm flying, doing all those other things. I'm flying, and I'm over here, especially as a senior guy, I'm over here telling, hey, that looks like, is that a weapon or is that a shovel? Type of things like that. So we're talking this, we're gaming this ourselves in the cockpit, and then we're talking, front the lead aircraft and trail aircraft. We're talking to each other as well, but only the left seater controlled the mass-mounted sight, and only the right seater controlled the weapon systems. Primarily, the pilot in command was in the right seat. Primarily, the pilot so the co-pilot, the number two in charge, and there's only two of us, so being number two means you're last. But he's over there and he's operating the mass mounted sight. But honestly, it's we're a team. There's no curtain dividing us. We're operating together, and the kind of the same way. Even though we're in different aircraft, the team is operating together as a cohesive team.
What was the range on the pod? How far out could it see?
Well, I don't really have an answer for that, but I will tell you that we also in the smaller the smaller window, which is the thermal imaging sight. The bigger one was the camera. Um, we had a laser range-finding designator. So what I would do is it's a laser that, let's say, a bomb or a Hellfire missile, I can encode that laser and it will follow that beam and hit the target. Or I can shoot that beam. It'll give me a range and a grid. And the furthest I can ever recall getting a grid or a range was like 15,000 meters. So 15 Ks. So that probably amounts to, yeah. So you're
That's
talking
crazy.
somewhere around the 12-mile range, somewhere around that. And it was I can't remember the class of laser it was, maybe a class 3 or a class 4, but it can blind people. It's a strong, at one point, it was the strongest airborne laser in the military. Obviously, technology has changed. The Kiowa was left behind. And another reason why I probably never heard about the Kiowa was because um, the Delta model, particularly. And so you have the OH-58AC, that Alpha Charlie, that's a Kiowa. Two blades, no weapons, no mass mounted sight. You get the Delta model that becomes the Kiowa Warrior. It's armed, it's got four blades, it's got a mass mounted sight. So some guys are like, "Oh, I flew the Kiowa," and it's like, which version? Because they're not the same. They don't even look the same. They just have a similar name. But so I flew the Delta model. I flew the Warrior, and the range, it's just like a typical helicopter. It's not going to get really all that far. And when it came to this airframe, it was really overweight. So the Army, put a bunch of stuff on it. So I was never able to take a full bag of fuel. So a full tank of fuel. We just call them bags because it's a bladder, a rubber bladder. So never ever able to take a full bag of fuel and full weapons because we'd be overweight. We wouldn't be able to get off the ground. So we were that's how we flew. We always flew at maximum gross weight and near maximum power, especially trying to take off.
Okay. When you got assigned that, or when that came up, were you disappointed until you actually got into it? Or, you know what I mean? Because you said you wanted the Black Hawk.
I was unsure. I didn't know exactly what I was getting into. Um, and that's really that's the best way I can describe it. I was just unsure. I didn't know what I was in for. I just knew that I went from, I think the Blackhawks flight school was like 12 weeks, and I just went to 28 weeks or something like that.
Oh,
So I more than doubled the
did
remaining.
you
So I was just unsure.
did you enjoy the training in it though? Did you go, oh, this is pretty cool once you got in it?
Yeah, absolutely. Because um I mean, and I'm not talking special operations like the 160th. I'm not going to sit here and talk. I'm just talking conventional Army aviation. But Hawks aren't flying at, we call it nap of the earth, NOE, 0 to 25 feet, and you're zipping along at, you know, pretty good speeds. Hawks aren't doing that. And then the mission said of, we're flying along, we're ingressing into an area, trying to keep below the trees or whatever. So now we're flying at 10 feet off the ground at 90 knots, and we pop up and simulate doing an engagement or whatever for training. And then you're going to do that under night vision goggles. So now you're turning the lights off and having to do the same things. The complexity of the Kiowa Warrior, not as an airframe but as a mission, um, is significantly more than anybody else. And I said this when I was teaching flight school at Fort Rucker, that the Kiowa Warrior could do any mission in the U.S. Army, with the exception of landing in the water like a Chinook, a sling load, which is, a Jeep below a Chinook or a Black Hawk, and medevac, because you have to have medical personnel to do a medical evacuation. But other than that, I can do every single mission. That airframe could do every single mission in the U.S. Army's inventory. maybe not to the same degree, in terms of like, let's say a deep attack like an Apache, but I could still do it because I have Hellfires. So, there's just certain things that I might not be able to do to the most extent, but I tell you what, I'm going to be able to do it, to a small extent, and I can do every single mission in the Army except for those three, which was exciting because it opened up the doors to do so many different things and be part of so many different operations and missions.
So as you're completing warrior training, do you know you're going to go over in a hot war at this point?
Yeah. And so not only are you selecting your aircraft, so we select our aircraft and then we go to what we call Flight School 21. We learn the airframe. There was two kind of branches, if you will, of the advanced aircraft. Flight School 21, which was the higher academic students, and then there was BWS, Basic Warfighter Course. And that was actually done in an Alpha Charlie, an OH-58D Alpha Charlie. And then they completed that. They learned all the skills I'm learning in my primary airframe, they're learning in this legacy aircraft. So then they're also going to have to go transition to their other primary aircraft, such as a Black Hawk or Chinook. The attack guys and scout attack guys, we always went to Flight School 21. Not that we're better than anybody else, but I would say our academics, we were higher performers. So when you got into Flight School 21, went through all the different phases of training, towards the end, you picked your assignment. And it was kind of, the Air Force does it really, really well. If you ever watch any videos on YouTube where guys are getting their aircraft or their assignment, they make it into a really big deal, and it's awesome. The Army does not do that at all. They could care less. It's too bad. It's too bad, but that's the way it is. So they're like, here's all the assignments. And I'm like, I knew who was going out the door next. It was the 101st. And again, I'm not a prior Army guy. At the time, I'm just finishing a year and a half or my second year in the Army, and I'm like, the only divisions I know here are the 101st and the 82nd. And that's from World War II with guys jumping into Normandy. So it's like, all right, I want to be one of these two because they're and they really are the most storied divisions in the Army. So which one's going out the door next? 101st. So I'm like, that's where I'm going to Campbell. So I selected Campbell, Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and finished candidate school, or I'm sorry, Flight School 21. And then I had to go to the warrant officer basic course. And that's just more academics, how to be a warrant officer, not necessarily a pilot or an aviator anymore, but a warrant officer. And then, then I discovered my ex-wife is pregnant with my number two kid. So now I have a young son, and now I'm having another one, and I know I'm immediately going to war. So that's kind of how that happened. So we go to Fort Campbell, and I got there in May 2005, and then we were out the door in August, August or September. I think it was August. And I tell you what, that was pretty exciting stuff. Loved every second of it, and couldn't, I mean, not that you always want, another deployment because they're year-long deployments, but it was like, all right, this is what we're doing for an indefinite amount of time. And the cycle
It's what
was,
you've been
especially
working for, right?
100%, 100%. I want to go to war. I'm not going to say war is a test of a man. I'm not going to say that. But also, I'm not going to say it's not a test of a man, but it's certainly, you want to test your skills as a soldier and especially as an aviator. So I wanted to prove myself, not just to, my wife or my family, but to myself, and deployed.
Where did you
And
ship off to?
so, so we left Fort Campbell. The aircraft left ahead of us, of course, and then they went via boat. And that kind of leads into this other story is once I left flight school and went to Fort Campbell, I never once I never flew, because they weren't going to train us new pilots to fly when the experienced guys need the flight time. They don't want to invest the training into us yet, because um, by the time we start training, and then by the time they're going to let the junior people fly instead of the senior guys, you're talking months. And you don't want to start a guy that who has, in, we call it progression training, and have a big break in training. You want that to be continuous, because that's going to build the confidence, and it's going to build experience. So I never flew. Got to Kuwait, Camp Beering, Kuwait.
How did they fly you over there? Were you on a military plane?
No, they contract commercial aircraft. And so it was, just a big, I can't remember what aircraft it was, but it's carrying 300 of us over there or whatever the number was. And we land and we're at Camp Beering for a bit. And in addition to not flying, this was probably one of the most detrimental things that ever happened to me in the Army was all of us new people. And there's probably about 12 of us that showed up to the unit and none of us are flying. And you have different what we call S shops in the Army. S1 is going to be I can't remember, but like your clerk, your the people that are doing decorations and your records and things like that. And then you have S2, which is intelligence, and S3, which is your operations, and S4, which is supply. So looking back on this, and I wish leadership would have realized this, is this guy is coming from a different branch of service. He doesn't know anything. So he needs to go to S2 or to S3 and learn how the Army operates. And S2 would have been great because of, learning intelligence and learning how the enemy is fighting, things like that. S3, how the Army operates and develops plans and mission sets and things like that. Nope, I go to supply. To this day, it almost breaks my heart because that was just one of the worst things that could have happened to me. And because I didn't learn anything. I didn't learn anything about the Army. I really didn't learn much about supply, which I never really dabbled into ever again. And I had to just kind of wallow in that misery until I was finally pushed down to a troop. And I was pushed down to a Annihilator troop, Alpha troop, and 217 Cav.
So what was your day? What was your day to day when you were doing supply stuff? Was it just?
It was hell. I mean, I'm not talking. Of course you got to keep that statement in perspective. But for me, it was just misery because it was all office crap, and I'm not learning anything to become an aviator because I'm not at the flight troop. So those guys at the flight troop, they're not even taking me under their wing to teach me anything because I don't work there. I work in the higher headquarters company or squadron or troop, I mean HHT. And so I'm not even part of the team. It felt like I would say that was probably one of the morale wise, probably the lowest point I've ever been in my career because I didn't even have any friends. I'm new to the unit. All my friends are in different shops or different areas, and we're not, linking up. And it just sucked. I mean, I don't even know what any other word to say it. And I'm going to go get Gatorades, or I'm finding MREs, and it's just miserable, absolutely miserable. And I had no supply
It's
background
bizarre to
either,
me.
so it's not like I could have been a benefit to the team.
Bizarre to me that they would invest that much into you to train you on that helicopter and then just put you in that position. That's weird.
I can see the leadership's point of view in terms of we're not going to start that because later in my career became an instructor pilot, and I also would not have put me into a flight troop and start flying me. But what I would have done is I think I would have done a little more research and figured out who this guy is. When you do a in brief with your commander, they're kind of feeling out who you are. And I think would have been better served not being in the S shop. But of course, I'm not part of those conversations. Maybe they had a different reason to put me in there, but I was not happy.
And how long were you in there? How long was that?
From
period?
The time I got into the unit, so Mayish until probably October, and then I was pushed down to Alpha Troop. So Annihilator Troop, 2nd Squadron, 17th Cavalry Regiment. That's just one of the greatest places I've ever been. One of the best organizations I've ever been part of. So I started training, and I don't know if I'm lucky or cursed, but I like to think myself lucky. But my first training flight, I mean, you're in Iraq, it's a combat zone. There's no such thing as real training. It's real combat. You just happen to be doing some training. And my first flight in Iraq was separated by 9 months from my last flight in flight school. I couldn't even start the damn helicopter. I had no idea what the hell I was doing. And I'm in the right seat. The right seat, is operating what? The weapon systems. He starts the aircraft, the primary pilot, the left seater. And this is how training goes in the Army. You always start in the primary pilot position. And so I have the troop standardization instructor pilot. So the senior warrant officer in Alpha Troop and the senior instructor pilot in Alpha Troop, Kevin Kist. That guy was awesome. He was a great mentor, a great aviator, and he was the person that I tried to emulate later in my career. Good, bad, right, wrong, because nobody's perfect, and some people don't. Just not everybody does everything exactly right. But that guy was awesome, and I did my best to emulate him as much as I could throughout my career. And um, he's in the left seat, and of course he's helping me start the aircraft, and I feel about this big. And we go out, we conduct, we're doing practice shooting, practice gunnery, and we go out and we're shooting. And we come back in, reload weapons, and to go out to do it again. And we actually got a troops in contact call. We were the closest asset. So now my first flight, 9 months after flight school, my first flight in country is now I'm going into a gunfight. And I don't know how to fly. I can barely fly the helicopter, and I certainly can't shoot. And I took this lesson to heart later in the Afghanistan deployment. And Kevin looks over me, and he's writing things down. We're talking, and he's writing things on his knee board. Because we have a little, clipboard that straps to our leg, and we write on that. It's called a knee board. And he kind of looks, he doesn't even look at me. He's like, I distinctly remember this. He's like, don't do shit until I tell you to do it. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, if we have to shoot, I will maneuver the aircraft and you push the fire switch, because he can't do it. I mean, he could physically move his hand onto my cyclic and push the button, but you now you're taking your left hand, putting it on the cyclic, and his right hand onto my cyclic. It's just not going to work. So if we had to shoot, I would be pushing the button, but he's on the radios, he's navigating the aircraft, he's flying the aircraft, he would be putting us in position to shoot the aircraft. And you strap these aircraft on, you don't get into them. They're a really, really big backpack, but that's what happens. And fortunately, we didn't have to shoot. We were on station overhead for quite a while, providing security and reconnaissance for the ground element, and we didn't have to shoot. But we went back, debriefed, and we went out and continued to do some flying throughout the next weeks. And this goes back to the consistency as a junior aviator. I went back home for the birth of my son, my second son, and I get a little bit of a sidebar here, but I was flying back into the Nashville airport, and my wife at the time not there to get me because she was in labor. That's how close I cut it. I looked around and I
Oh my
saw this.
gosh.
Yeah, yeah. So I looked around, and there's this other guy, young. If I remember correctly, he was like like a private first class or a specialist. And I'm walking, I walk up to him, and he's like, getting to attention. And I'm like, relax. I just need, are you going back to Campbell? He's like, yes, sir. And I'm like, I need a ride, man. Do you think you can drop me off at exit 1? And he's like, yep, absolutely. So that's how I got home. And then, of course, now I have a vehicle and went to the hospital, and my wife gave birth to my second son, Blake. My first son is named after me. And I think I made it there less than 12 hours from the time I was boots on the ground in the US to him being
Wow.
born. So that worked out real well. But spent the 3 weeks there, and then went back to Iraq, and then I was the primary pilot, co-pilot, if you will, for Kevin Kiss, the standardization instructor pilot. So he, from the beginning, really, I would say, groomed me into becoming a competent left seat pilot, and then becoming a pilot in command after we returned from Iraq. And then, he was my letter of endorsement to become an instructor pilot.
Where were you at in Iraq when you were there that time?
So we started off
Were you
at
based
FOB
in
McKenzie.
Iraq?
Yep. Yep. We were in Iraq, and our FOB was FOB McKenzie. We were there. And it was, if I remember correctly, I'm saying 15, 20 miles straight line to LSA Anaconda, Balad, Iraq. Massive base. That runway must be 15,000 feet long. You have an Army side, you have an Air Force side. Massive.
How many Warrior helicopters were there?
So a squadron should probably, if I remember, 30 would be in a squadron, 10 per flight troop. Um, and we ended up getting moved from Mackenzie to Balad, and then we operated in Balad for probably, I'm going to say 4 to 6 months. I don't remember exactly. and fell underneath the first of the 101st Apache Battalion's task force and flew out of Balad for that time period.
What was going on in the war then, there in Iraq, when you were there?
You know, I can't really remember. I know in the summer was the surge, and with bringing in more U.S. troops to kind of tamper out the counterinsurgency that was occurring, and and I would say that was probably the biggest thing, if I remember correctly. And but we stayed at Anaconda for those time, and then we moved up to FOB Warrior in Kirkuk, Iraq, northern Iraq. And that's really when I would say I was really, we call it hanging by the tail stinger when you have no idea what the heck you're doing in the cockpit. The tail stinger is this skid that's off the back of the helicopter, off of the vertical fin, to protect the tail rotor. And that's just a term we use to be like, you are not anywhere nearly where you need to be. You're so far behind the helicopter and what's happening. You're not only are you not in the cockpit, but you're not 2 or 3 moves ahead of the aircraft, which is, those things that really start divide. That's the divide really between a pilot in command and a pilot. So the pilot is the co-pilot, and but Kevin was instrumental in, because he would give me the business if I wasn't performing, and rightfully so. I mean, we're in a combat zone. I need to perform, but you can only perform to the level of your training. And fortunately, he was able to get me to where I needed to be, and quickly. I definitely owe him a lot. But the one thing I will say about myself is I always studied. I studied my ass off, because aviation is always changing, and it goes right back to all these things that you have to have memorized. But the more you can stick in your brain, the better off you're going to be. And you can only control how well you fly based on how often you fly. But academics, you can do that anytime. And I always live by that little phrase, because you can study anytime you want. That really, the academics, that's really, and the decision making, that's really what makes the difference between a pilot in command and a pilot, that junior co-pilot.
How often were you flying during this period?
So as a junior guy, and especially and I don't consider myself a poor junior pilot, but as a junior pilot, you're going to fly every other day. And usually the schedule is out for about 2 weeks. So you're flying about half the time, if you put that in perspective. Fast forwarding to Afghanistan, as a pilot in command and an air mission commander, I'm flying 13 out of 14 days. So, or 20 out of 21 days type of thing. Like you're one of the prime guys. So it takes time to get that way. So enough, but not as much as I'd like, because I had the nickname in Iraq, the White Dove. If there was anything that was going to happen, it wasn't while I was flying. I couldn't believe it. It just broke my heart. If something was going to happen, we might be on station and we're developing it, and then our mission block is over and we're getting relieved by the other team. They're coming out, and we're going home, and we'll hear it on the radio. And they're mixing it up and they're shooting, and I just couldn't believe it. But that's how the deployment went for me. Did a lot of learning, and got to see a lot of different things, a lot of different mission sets, a lot of night vision goggle time, with a lot of really stellar, outstanding aviators. But I never got in the mix. It was just how it went. So Iraq was
Well, that was
not
frustrating.
boring. It was frustrating, absolutely frustrating for my personality and what I was there to do. But it happened to lots of people. I just got the nickname, which was fine, but whatever. But I loved it. It was a lot of learning, and I had the right people around me. And you have to put yourself in the right position as well. And the way you do that is being competent. Whether you can fly well or not, you can be competent by being academically strong. Or when you're not working, go to the S2 shop and start asking questions about patterns of the enemy in that particular area, since you might be flying there in 2 days. And, it's not what you know, it's who you know and how you know them. And putting your face out there doesn't hurt, but you want to put your face out there in a positive light and be productive, just not being an ass kisser.
So when you were flying, it wasn't like people were taking pot shots at you normally when you were there.
No, no, because if you ever saw them shooting, they would meet the ROE, and then I would have been able in the mix. But we never saw them shoot at the lead or our aircraft if we were trail, or vice versa. And um, I never saw that. Now, of course, everybody said, I do believe this, that you're being shot at when you don't even know it a lot of times, because especially from a longer range, you're not going to hear it. And especially if you've passed the area and they're shooting behind you, you're not going to see that either. And even more so during the day, because it's harder to see tracer ammunition being shot at you if they even have that loaded. Completely different at night, but I can't remember ever being shot at in Iraq.
What was the ratio day to night missions?
So you would usually be on a day, 2 week cycle for 1 or 2 cycles, so maybe a month, and then rotate to the night cycle for either a 2 week cycle or a month. And that's kind of how that went. And goggles can be a challenge, especially because now you can only see out of the two tubes that are in front of your eyes, and it's only got a 40-degree field of view on one tube, and then it's you're in the cockpit, and all the lights inside the cockpit are dimmed down, if not even off, because we have lost aviators to enemy fire at night, because the screens, particularly the screens, were so bright it actually illuminated their faces. And whether this story is true or not, I heard of a story where they had captured someone that had shot at one of the aircraft, and they said they were shooting at the green hue of the screens. So screens went down. We had one, what we call a map light. It's a map. It's a light that's stuck over here. And I'm doing this as a left seater right now. I'd grab this and just kind of hang it over into my armpit. Now I always knew where it was. And when I needed to look at something or, change it, you would know where these switches are. But if you had to write something down, you'd have to pull out that light. And it was really, you dim it down as well. But when it came to switches, we call those blind cockpit drills. And you'd practice to know where those switches are and how to manipulate them. And some are rotary dials, so you'd be like, okay, 1, 2, 3, now I'm in the right spot. So you practice these things and get better, and then over time you don't have to practice anymore. You just got to practice as a new guy. But a lot of that stuff really played into being benefit when I was an instructor pilot, because I'm over in the left seat, or I'm sorry, the right seat or the left seat, whatever it is, and I'll be telling this guy, hey, 2 switches down, and then 2 rotations, whatever the situation is. And those blind cockpit drills really paid off.
Any helicopters get shot down while you were over there in your?
I don't recall anything
squadron
being shot down in Iraq. In terms of even the brigade, nothing in my. So I would say the closest was a Kiowa Warrior in my troop, a lady pilot by CW3 Lori Hill, another great aviator. She was for this mission. She was actually awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, which I think she was one of the very first women aviators to be awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross in the U.S. history. And but she was actually shot in the foot, and the aircraft was shot up a ton. And they did what we call a run on landing. They had to do a run on landing to recover the aircraft, because the flight controls were badly damaged and loss of hydraulics, things of that nature. She did a great job, and landed that helicopter. But I would say that was the closest there was an aircraft to being shot down in Iraq. Yeah, they did a great job recovering that aircraft.
So when you left Iraq, what month, and was that 2006 then?
It would have been August 2006. Came back, and then before we even left Iraq, we knew when we were going to Afghanistan. So maybe the spring, maybe early summer of 2006, we knew we were going to Afghanistan in January 2008. And during, you come back, you recover, get the aircraft from, Jacksonville, Florida, fly them up to Fort Campbell. You don't have a year off. You just have a year where you're not deployed. You're still doing PT. You're still doing training cycles at the Joint Readiness Training Center at Fort Polk, Louisiana, or you're going to the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California. And so when you're doing all these things, you're TDY, you're gone from the home. Or for me, now I'm being brought up as a pilot in command. So now I'm flying 3 or 4 days a week, particularly with Kevin Kist and other instructor pilots and senior pilots in command, to get the experience and have them. Man, that was tough. They would just basically just ask me all these questions and give me all these different scenarios, and I have to work through them as I'm flying, whether we're doing a cross country and we're out in the national airspace. Maybe we're going to Fort Knox, or we're in the training area and we're flying at 80 knots at 50 feet or something like that, or doing practice gunnery. So I'm just getting, questions after questions, and they're seeing how how I fly and what my thought process is and things like that. So that year, even though I was home, I wasn't home. And um, that was a very academically tough year. And but that was, that's normal. It's not like they just picked on me, or I was the only guy. There was other people that were brought up as pilots in command. But I did leapfrog some people that had been in the unit longer than I, and I became a pilot in command before them. And then people who were pilots in command before me, I became air mission commanders before them, or an air mission commander before they did. So I continuously leapfrogged people, and a lot of it was due to academics and listening to the senior guys and being able to, implement the aircraft and that knowledge properly.
So you were ready to go to Afghanistan then when that happened?
Yeah, actually, another thing I had to do was the high altitude Army training site. So they sent me to Eagle, Colorado. It's a National Guard school. The active duty Army kind of hijacked it and turned it into HAM. It's high altitude mountain environment training site or system or whatever the S is. And that course opened my eyes to power management. The Kiowa Warrior, like I said, underpowered, overweight, and you really had to fly that aircraft. You had to be an aviator. You could not be a pilot. Pilots won't survive. And I learned it was like a week-long school, so it doesn't seem like very long, but the amount of knowledge that was imposed onto a student, it was massive. And I learned so much. And so with that course under my belt, that really, in my mind, I was like, okay, now I'm ready, because what I just learned, I had no idea about, and I probably would have killed myself because of lack of knowledge. But these guys, and I'm going to say there was probably only 4 to 6 of us that went to that course. So I was very fortunate. And all the other guys were instructor pilots and the senior guys in the unit. So I was just a new pilot in command. And I fell into that course. Actually, there was someone else that was supposed to go to that course. I think he had a family emergency. He couldn't go. And I was just the guy in the office in the books. And they're like, hey, you want to go? And I'm like, yes. And I fell into that course. So it worked out great.
So when did you end up in Afghanistan, and where did you end up?
Afghanistan was 2008, January to December 2008, so the entire year of 2008. Um, we flew into Kyrgyzstan, Manas Air Base in Kyrgyzstan, getting, flying on another contracted commercial aircraft. The aircraft went on to military airplanes flown into Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, and then we eventually met the aircraft there. And uh, did our all the in processing and classes and crap you got to do. And then we flew the aircraft to Jalalabad, FOB Fenty, on the very far eastern side of Afghanistan. I'm going to say it's 60 miles from the Pakistan border, maybe even less. And way back another little history lesson, way back in the Russian-Afghan war, that was the first time the Stinger missile, that was our missile that we supplied to I think the Mujahideen. They shot down 3 out of 4 Russian Hind helicopters at that base. So it's kind of full circle type of thing. And we were there from my troop eventually got moved again, but we probably got there in February and left in April.
Was that the
Mhm.
surge? Would that have been the years of the
I don't.
surge in Afghanistan?
I don't know. I couldn't tell
I
you,
can't remember.
to be honest.
I feel like that.
Either.
I feel like that kind of was. I feel like that was. What was actually, and what elevation were you at there? What was that?
So FOB Fenty, I can't recall exactly, but I think it was 2,500 feet mean sea level. But we would depart there and go into the mountains, into the Kunar Valley and the Pesh River Valley. And, so you go up to the north in the Kunar Valley, and then the Pesh turns it runs east-west. And in the Pesh is the Korengal Valley, which, there's a lot has been reported about the Korengal Valley. And the Wanat Valley, which is, pretty major engagement happened there when we had 3 Medal of Honor recipients, I think, out of that battle. But that was our normal area in the FOB Fenty area. And unlike Iraq, the first flight in Afghanistan, we were shot at by RPGs. So from the very beginning, and that's just the huge contrast between Iraq for me and Afghanistan for me, because from the beginning, from then to the end of the year, I was like the bullet magnet. If there was something happening, a lot of times I was, not every time, but a lot of times I was part of it. And so just a complete contrast, not only environment, but how the enemy was treating me specifically.
All right. Tell me about that first mission. What happened?
So that first mission was just a standard, let's go out and look at, find the lay of the land. Not really a dedicated, we're doing this today. We're just going to go out, we're going to fly. We're doing what we call a local area orientation. We're just seeing what's what. And we were in the Kunar Valley and came, by a mountain, and 2 RPGs came up at us. And the Kiowa Warrior, this was, I think it was its second deployment, not my unit, but the airframe. I think it was only its second deployment to Afghanistan. And that was the first time that the airframe was in that area. So I'm sure they were seeing what we were capable of. But we turned around, and of course, we can't find them. They slid behind a rock or whatever, and that was that. But yeah, the first flight was very, very different.
How close were the RPGs by you?
They weren't very close. I'm not going to sit here and say they were, but I don't remember them being very close. They did detonate, do their air burst, and from what I understood is when that RPG does its self detonation, well, they were also putting kind of like a wax sleeve around the RPG head, and then put it with rocks or bolts or whatever, and turn it into basically a claymore. So that's really what we saw, was that bursting and that dark smoke, and then you could kind of see fragments kind of going all over. But I mean, it wasn't close enough to damage the aircraft, but it was close enough to get your attention and realize what was happening.
All right, so tell me some of the things that happened while you were there.
So with some of the bigger ones is, I was one of the first Kiowas to go into the Korengal Valley. Never mixed it up, but we did respond to troops in contact, and then after probably 2 or 3 days of doing that, we were the command, not my command, but I believe it was the brigade command. They cut us off. They're like, Kiowas aren't going in there, only Apaches. So they cut us out of the Korengal Valley. But flying in the Pesh River Valley, that was one of the kind of more unique things. So as the Pesh is running east-west on the north side of the river, there's a high mountain range, and then of course, well, there's mountains everywhere because they're down on the river valley. But there's a FOB down there called Honecker Miracle, and they would routinely take fire from this one ridge, and we just happened to be in the area. uh, and again, got you never know when you're going to get into a gunfight or something significant. It's just pure luck. I guess I was lucky that year, and got we were right after they took fire. We're coming. The Apaches were on station. They did some shooting. They didn't. I don't recall them creating any sort of enemy KIA or anything of the sort. But they did bring in a B-1 bomber. We call them Bone. That's their call sign, and they dropped a couple bombs. So we get on station, and remember that this stuff can happen really, really quickly. And we're a slow helicopter, so we might be, just on the other side of the ridge, but we were also limited to 6,000 feet. Even though the aircraft can perform above that, we were limited to 6,000 feet. So we couldn't cross a lot of ridge lines. So we had to stay in all the river valleys, which made us transition from one part of the battle space to another slower, and then compounding with our slower speed. So we get on station, and we're doing our reconnaissance, and my left seater, CW2 Jeremy Miller, great guy. Actually, I went to candidate school with him, and he was General Petraeus's driver at one point when he was enlisted. And he's like, I see, and the people, the infantrymen down at the COP, the Combat Outpost Honecker Miracle, they're like, hey, we see this, this white Taliban flag, and we're like, okay. They kind of walk us on it, and my left seater sees it, and I'm like, okay, let's get this thing. And so we we decide to and so it's a stick, and I'm trying to put the 50 cal and my skid and kind of do this number and have Jeremy just be able to reach out and grab it. So you're talking an arm length away at 7,000 feet or whatever it is, in the temperatures are getting warm. It's mid-afternoon in April, and I'm in a Kiowa Warrior trying to do this. And I tell you what, Jeremy was about 3 inches from being able to grab that thing before it just kind of blew away with the rotor wash. And so we come back around, and it's me, it's Jeremy, and then my Air Mission Commander, CW3 Scott Cottress. And whenever anything happened, it was in that unit. It happened to me, or it happened to Scott, or it happened to us together. I would say of anything that happened, there was one of those combinations, 50%, if not even a higher degree of the time that happened to Alpha Troop. Scott and I were involved with it, if not the two people involved. And I'm looking at the photo right now on my wall. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to land, kick Jeremy out. He's going to go grab this flag, and we're going to go give it to the ground guys. So we do just that. And it's kind of funny because I'm landing, and it's very uneven terrain. It's a mountain, and I can't, where I elected to land because of power. I've only got so much of it, and I can only do so many different choices of landing area. And I want it to be close because we're at a high elevation. I don't want him running all over the place and being, winded. And of course I want to keep eyes on him because I'm the pilot in command. If anything happens to him, it's on me. And of course he used to be Army
Right.
Ranger. So he's like,
Right.
dude, I'm good. So I got the right guy in the left seat, and which goes right back the entire year. I always had the right person in the left seat. And thank God. And he gets out, and he kind of goes around this little turn and I lose sight of him, and he comes back out. He's got the flag, a big shit-eating grin on his face, and jumps in the cockpit, and we take off. And when he was getting in, like, he bumps the controls, and I look at him, I'm like, stop. I was terrified because I'm like, we're gonna roll over this and down this mountain, because I never was able to put the collective completely down. So I was always still kind of hovering and flying, keeping in position. And we take off, and we departed before he was even strapped in, because we had to go. And we go down, and he's telling me, he's like, yeah. I'm like, dude, I thought you were just going to go right there so I could see you. And he's like, well, I found a blood trail and I followed it. And he had somebody, whether it was the Apache or the Bone, they had created some sort of BDA. And so what he found was, and he's a hunter, and he's like, it looks like, someone shot a deer. There's blood everywhere, and there's, some meat, there. And I'm like, great, good day. And so we go down, we land at the cop, and like I said, I'm looking at the photos right now on my wall, and there's all these infantry guys and the leadership of the infantry. They're all around us, and we got some great photos holding this flag. And they gave us an American flag that they had inscribed their unit and some other stuff on it. Um, and we took off, and then the company commander asked us to land at a different cop, and they gave us these, attaboy, big, massive, coins. And we got coins, and then landed, and then rightfully so, kind of got my butt handed to me, because it was probably a risk I didn't need to take. But I'm sure glad I did it, looking back on it, 15, 20 years later. I'm like, yeah, that was great. But yeah, and from a leadership role, they were probably right. The next day, we're going out and we're flying, and before we step to the aircraft, I have one of the leadership come up to me, and they're like, and I'm talking like the upper echelon leadership at my unit, and he's like, please don't do that again. I'm like, Roger that, sir, no problem. He's like, but if you happen to find a flag, I would love to have one. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with that information? But never came across another flag to get for him. So, but it was cool. That was fun.
Were you guys on call? Like if somebody got into a firefight or something?
Mm-hmm. So they call that QRF.
Or were you always just up flying missions?
We would not really sit QRF because of our speed. And our job was to be out looking for stuff, again, back to that find, fix, and finish type mentality. So we always had a mission set. The Apaches and the medevacs, they would be sitting QRF, and they're faster. They have a higher on station time because they have carry more fuel, and then they obviously carry way more weapons than we do. So they're the QRF, and that's the right way to do it, I think. And we come back, and that's the standard configuration for all the different task forces the Apaches are. And we would always be flying. Our mission backs were usually about 4 hours a day, but you're never flying 4 hours. You're flying 6, you're flying 7 every single day. Very rarely are you going to come back after 4 hours. Happen, but just not very often.
All right, give me some other stories that happened when you were out there.
So one that's kind of funny is we always take these, we call them tactical head nods. Basically you fall asleep while you're flying because you're flying so often, you're just exhausted. Well, I look over at my left seat and I'm like, hey, Jason, I'm tired. I've got to sleep. And he's like, all right, no problem. Well, the next thing I know is we're in the FARP landing. Because FARP is forward arm and refueling points. We're back at the airport, at the airfield, and we're getting gas. And I'm like, what time is it? I've been asleep for an hour and a half. And then I'm hearing on the this is what really woke me up is Annihilator 2-3, you're landing on the wrong runway. And I'm like, what? And Jason's like, he's like, and I'm like, oh, damn it. But there was like aircraft behind me that wasn't helping either. So, it was everybody's failure because the runways are, it's the same runway, but you have to do the reciprocal for the 180 degrees. It's runway 13 and 31. So it's pretty easy to mess those up. It is. But anyways, we landed, got gas, and, blasted off and did another bag of gas. We ended up moving off out of Jalalabad to FOB Salerno in, I think, May. And that's where stayed for the rest of the year. The troops stayed there for the rest of the year. And again, I mean, it was hot. That everything we did was just kept going and going and going. And it was always Scott and myself. And usually my left seater was Brian Peterson, and usually Scott's left seater was Brandon Hodge, or we would, swap the left seaters. But it was basically us four. We were just a great team. And it's smart and it's good to break up the team sometimes, so people don't get complacent and just assume that everybody knows what the other person's doing. But on the flip side of the coin, which I do like, is you do know what the other guy's doing or what you're expecting him to do. I prefer to fly the trail aircraft. There's a little bit more, I don't know, art to it in terms of where the lead aircraft is, making a turn. I have to predict where he's going to be, and then also be able to, where's potential the major threat going to be, and I have to, what weapon system am I going to engage that potential threat? Am I going to be clear of him? There's so much more to flying trail, and I was a good shot, so that's what I would prefer to do, is be trail. The lead guy is always the scout aircraft. He's always looking. My job is to protect him. I'm not looking for anything. He's the center of my world. And when it comes to shooting the Kiowa Warrior, unlike the Apache, which has great systems, we put a dry erase marker on our windscreen that's our pipper. When I go to do a test fire or a real engagement, if I do a test fire, I'm putting the pipper on my target, and I just kind of memorize where the 50 cal bullets are going or the rockets are shooting. And then I just remember, okay, that rocket went high and to the right of that pipper by about an inch. Now I just take that imaginary point, I just move it onto the target. And doing that little Kentucky windage, we were extremely effective with our weapon systems. Very, very close shots all the time. And bullets and rockets, they're affected differently by aerial ballistics, particularly rockets because of the size of them. But you have to kind of take those into account. But we ended up moving up to, or down to, it was actually down to FOB Salerno in the host province, and conducted operations for the rest of the year. But August 2008 was pretty busy, pretty significant for particularly us four, but really Scott and myself. And one day in it was August 17th, 2008. It's us four, same four guys, and we're called to return to the FOB because there's a troops in contact. What had happened was the enemy, whatever term you want to utilize, I'm just going to use the enemy, keep it vague, just for simplicity, really. They had driven a vehicle-borne IED through the gate, And coincidentally, that gate was close to not, we didn't, we were like the only people that didn't live in what we call brick and mortar buildings. We lived in tents. So they drove a V-bid through the gate, detonated it, killed like 30 Iraqi police officers, Iraqi army soldiers. And so we were called back because what the obviously the U.S. forces and Afghan National Army forces had, collapsed onto that place, and they were, treating the wounded and, putting fires out and securing the area. Well, we were brought back to secure the area and kind of push away from the FOB a little bit, see if there was any more threats. I don't know if it was Scout or myself. Ended up finding a threat. It was another vehicle, and you can tell these vehicles because they're, everything that's usable on a vehicle is taken off, whether it's a headlight or a tail light, and they're squatted down because they're heavy. And we find one of these guys, and they're kind of milling about, and it's like it just doesn't fit right. Well, we ended up getting U.S. forces onto that vehicle, and they had a shootout and killed the driver. And then they, approached the vehicle and discovered that this is a massive IED. So the first one is to get through the gate. The second one is to get through the gate, or continue through the gate, get onto the FOB, and cause obviously significant destruction. And again, I'm not saying they would have stopped by our tents, but our tents were right by that gate. And so they brought EOD in, set up the vehicle for destruction, and we pushed out. And it was just a massive explosion, which just as I have no idea, 150 foot mushroom cloud into the air and leveled all the trees. And there was a local national home that just got destroyed. And, there's cattle that are just dead on the ground, hundreds of feet away. And I mean, I'd like to think a cattle is probably a little more robust than a human, and you're talking 200 feet away, and that cow's dead. So what would have done on the installation? So we come back, end of mission. Everything's, as good as it's going to get while we're here. Get relieved by another team, and we end of mission, do our debrief, get chow, get our heads down, go to sleep. So on the 18th, we go up, fly, no big deal. At night, we get the FOB gets attacked by a massive force, like 30 to 40, 50 enemy fighters, and the QRF Apaches are immediately launched, and what they're trying to do is get onto the FOB and cause as much destruction as they could. And so the Apaches they're up flying and shooting, and I don't think they produced any sort of KIA, nothing that was reported. And so we get woke up. Scott's the initial person to get woke up at about 3 a.m. and by our platoon leader, Captain Pete Thomas, great guy. And Scott wakes myself and Brian and Brandon up, and we get pushed out. Our flight block, or time block, probably would have been like at 06. So we still had a few hours till we had to go, but we got essentially launched early. And we went up, we took off, or Scott took off to went to the task force talk, got a brief. The three of us went to our CP, our command post, our office, if you will, got our playbooks, which essentially these playbooks are like 3-ring binders that have all this data in them, all these frequencies and units and maps and things that we just need in the cockpit. Get our weapons, pre-flight in the aircraft. We have a quick team brief. And usually the brief at the talk, you're talking like 30 minutes. And then you go to the CP and you brief as a team, and that's, another 30 minutes. This was so abbreviated that both of them were like 10 minutes. We immediately take off. I'm armed with a rocket aircraft. I'm in the right seat, Brian's in the left. And Scott has a rocket and 50 cal, and he's in the right seat, and Brandon's in the left. And we take off as a team. Scott does the battle handover with Bearcat 6, the Apache commander, or at least, it would be the Apache commander. And we take over the mission. We immediately check in with Glory 6. The battalion commander is actually on the ground, out with his troops, which is great. And he gives us immediate clearance of fires into this, and gives us the grid for hostiles are in this area, kill them. And they identified that point with the J lens, and the J lens essentially is a camera. Either it's going to be on a a super high tower or dangling from a blimp, a balloon, and they're just scanning, and they find them, and they give us the grid, give us a clearance of fires, and we. We're going to do a quick look before we just start shooting, especially since the area they want us to shoot was like a 20-foot by 20-foot box of like a garden, if you will. And two of the sides are calots. That's like a local national home. That's just what they call them. So like we can't just go rolling in. We have to make sure there's no civilians that are in that area. So we do some reconnaissance.
So is
and
this
we Mhm.
is this a village then on the
It's
outside
very
of the?
close to the village. So FOB Salerno has a east-west running runway. It's a dirt runway, 3,000 feet. On the north side of it is all the FOB, and then on the north of that, even more so, is a very small mountain range. And on the south side, outside of the wire, where all the bad guys now had been repelled by the guard towers, it's all like agricultural fields, like cornfields or whatever. And we're under goggles, so we don't know that exactly. I mean, we fly over the area, but it's like I don't know if it's corn or soybeans. Who cares? It's a field.
Are you seeing gunfire at
We
this point or anything?
we do. We finally do. So Scott starts taking fire. He's braking. We're braking with him. I wasn't set up for an engagement because just with the houses and things, I didn't. And rockets are a difficult weapon to shoot. It's going to do kind of what it wants, especially let's say a fin doesn't open up, and that thing is just going to really do what the hell it wants. Whereas a bullet, it's going to keep traveling. There'll be some drop at some point, but the rocket, it's going to continue to accelerate until it runs out of motor, and then it'll detonate whatever it hits. But I wasn't set up for an engagement, so we end up setting up for a properly set it up for engagement. And how an engagement kind of works is like the lead aircraft, he'll pop up, and this goes to the kind of the art or finesse of being trail. He'll pop up. Well, now his belly is being exposed to enemy fire. So I want to be set up, and he's going to brief me. Hey, I'm going to be outright. Okay, so in this example, he's outright, and I shot a rocket just to put in the general vicinity. It's not going to be a very accurate rocket, just to protect his belly. When he starts pushing over, now I'm coming up and my belly's exposed, so he's protecting my belly. And as he's coming out, now I'm in, he's braking, and now I'm putting effective fires onto the target. Well, we end up doing that, but again, back to the whole fuel and ammunition combination, I've got 4 rockets in each pod, so I've got 8. He's got 300 rounds of 50 cal and 4 rockets. So, and 50 cal is going to allow you a lot more engagements. So I already know Scott's, is going to have more turns in on the target. So we do this a couple times. At a certain point, I call Winchester, which means no more weapons, ammunition run. And he pushes on the target. And I'm like, hey, let's keep rolling on the target. I'll just follow you in, even though I don't have anything. I'll just keep their heads down. And trail is always the one that gets shot at because there's nobody protecting trail. So, I'm taking a pretty big gamble. And what we kind of discovered was that we had already killed those 4 guys, or at least we weren't taking any more fire. Later, we did discover we had produced that KIA and the BDA, and so at this point, Scott still has the ammunition in his 50 cal, still has some fuel. I'm like, hey, I'm going to go back to the FARP, get fuel, get ammo, and he's like, yeah, good idea. So he heads over he starts continuing to do reconnaissance security for Glory 6. I'm headed back to the FARP, and I land, and there's nobody there. So I'm like, Brian, you got to get out and find somebody because we need, ammunition. Well, everybody was in the bunker because everybody, since the FOB was being attacked, all the support people are ordered into the bunkers for protection. Well, he goes and he has to find these guys, and he's like, hey, we need ammo, we need gas. So he's finally, some way, was able to coerce some of these guys to come help. We didn't take on fuel because we had just got into the fight, so we still had like an hour of gas left. And so for the first time in my career, I took, outside of gunnery, I took on 14 rockets, 7 and 7. And Brian helped load every single time we landed. Brian helped load ammunition, and same thing with Brandon when Scott went into the FARP. So we come back out, and now Scott's got to go get gas. We ended up linking back up as a team after he came back out with fuel. And Glory 6 wanted us to split the team to provide more reconnaissance and more just more security. So there's a wadi running east-west. I'm like, hey, I'll go south, you stay north. And because we always want to have some sort of deconfliction, whether it's laterally on the ground, hey, I'm not going to go north, you don't come south, or an altitude deconfliction because of the threat of a mid-air collision. So Scott ends up finding a body, and this body had AK-47 bolt cutters, and he could tell that there was a suicide vest under his equipment, and they were dressed in like we call them chocolate chips, like the desert chocolate chip uniform that the guys in Desert Storm wore. So they had a full intent of when they got onto the fob to kind of meld in, get to some place without being challenged and do some damage. But the ground element starts working towards that. Okay, cool. And then Scott found two other guys, or no, after they were starting to walk in, Scott, just the way things were working, Scott and I, so two different areas took fire. And the way I was coming in, I just happened to fall right on trail. I could see him taking fire. Once he broke, I shot. And then we ended up setting up a more traditional engagement, killed those two guys. And then we went back into our sectors and he finds two other people. But these are the two people I'm talking about. He finds these two people, and they're just kind of like laying there. They're playing possum is what they were doing. And so he's walking the ground element onto them, and uh, as they're getting closer and closer, there's two guys, both pop up, and Scott's close because he's turning, keeping eyes on, seeing what these guys are doing, and providing that information to the infantrymen or coming down. Both guys pop up. One guy, because the infantrymen are now probably about 10 meters away, they pop up, start shooting at the infantry guys, and then the other one starts shooting at Scott and Brandon. It's just natural instinct that when you're making a turn, whichever direction you're turning, if I'm turning right, I'm the one that's looking. If turning left, the left seater's looking out to just clear. It's just natural. Well, thank God that's what happened, because one of the AK-47 rounds went in front of Scott's face, and as Brandon was turning, it went in his helmet, through his hair, out his helmet.
Mm.
And yeah, so as they're making this sharp, now significantly hard left turn, and cause some damage to the aircraft still flying fine. But now we're setting up for another engagement, and the infantry guys are pinned down about 10, 15 meters, probably about 10 meters at this point, and they want a danger close engagement. Well, the danger close engagement is based on weapon system and how far away you are. The further away you are, the larger that area that the munition can go to, so it makes that danger close area larger. But at the closest distance in the book is 300 meters, 15 meters for the 50 cal, 60 meters for the rockets that I have. So they are well within danger close. And we're like, yep, give us your initials, but do your best to push back as much as you can. They were able to bound about 5 meters more north, and then kind of in a low ground, because they're in a field. So there's plowed areas or irrigation, things of that nature. And Scott comes in, he shoots. I'm rockets, so I shoot. I know I killed one of the guys. We come back around, do a couple more engagements. And the ground guys, I've been in contact with one of them. There's debris falling, all over the place. So it's pretty high stakes. The last thing you ever want to do is have fratricide, where we kill some of our own good guys. That's the last thing anybody wants to live with. Um,
Right.
and so Scott's like, hey, I got to go back to the FARP and check this aircraft out. And kudos to Brandon, like that guy he just got shot not in the head, but close enough, about as close as you can get. And the guy never mentally left the fight ever. Huge compliments for Brandon. And so Scott's in the FARP. I'm providing security because now, I've reported up to that ground element. Hey, one guy is dead. The other guy appears to be wounded. Can't confirm. So as they are starting closing in on those two guys, one of them, the live one, detonated a suicide vest, caused a couple KIA for Afghans, and 6 wounded in action. And so now they're calling up the 9-line medevac, so we can transmit that to the TOC, and they can start spooling up that Blackhawk to come get them. That's traditional, right? Mind you, we're a mile from the FOB. This is all taken. Everybody, I distinctly remember people on top of Connexes filming taking pictures of this live engagement. Most people don't get to see that. I mean, a significant, super small number of military personnel don't engage the enemy. I mean, they have really no contact with the enemy. So
Right.
not only
Right.
receiving fire, but also returning fire. You're in a pretty small group, and I take pride in that, to be honest. So Scott's in the FARP, and there now we're doing this 9-line medevac, and I'm listening to it. Of course, I'm not a doctor, and I'm like, Brian, what about going to the ground and we start CASEVACing these guys? And that's an actual, like I was talking about the missions that we can do. We can't do medevac, sling loads, or landing in the water, but in the book we can do CASEVAC. That is one of our missions. And he's like, absolutely. And Brian used to be an infantryman, if I remember correctly, and even a sniper. And I mean, just the right dude. I mean, sharp looking guy, he's probably like 6 foot, sideburns, well past regulation, just a stud. And I get to have that guy in my left seat all the time. That's who I get to work with. It's just great. And takes a huge load off of my back. I mean, that guy was, in my opinion, of all the things that happened that day, and we're not even done on, but that guy was the hero of the battle, hands down. And he gets out, and I'm doing like this run on landing, because I don't want to come to that 2 foot hover and then land. Like, I'm not. This ain't flight school. This isn't landing at the FARP getting gas. I need to get on the ground and keep some more momentum, and just continuously be that moving target. So I land, right as that aircraft came to a stop. The guy's out the door. Well, we don't have doors, but his armor side panel's open, and he's grabbed his M4 and going out. I lose sight of him, and he comes back with the guy who's bleeding all over the place, stuffs him in the cockpit. There's no way to strap him in. I mean, the guy's in excruciating pain, and his own body armor and stuff like that. Straps him in, slams the side panel closed, and he's like, good to go. And I just distinctly remember, not just this time, but this is the time that I remember most vividly, is there's dirt, being like thrown up all over the place because we were getting shot at. But Brian's out there, and just, our body armor. The only thing that we have armored in the aircraft is a little side panel, a seat bottom, and a seat back, and then our body armor. Our body armor we have less body armor than an infantry guy. So he's out there with, nothing, completely exposed. And, I blast off, I take off and go to the cash pad. Scott's listening to this, and he tells he tells Brandon, go to the cash pad and, start receiving the wounded, because the only people that go to the cash pad are the medevac Blackhawks. So now this is completely unorthodox aircraft coming into. We don't want these, medical knuckleheads doing something crazy and getting hurt, or, whatever. And so he runs to the cash pad. I land before he even gets there. But the first guy that sees me is one of our crew chiefs, and he comes up, running up, because he thinks one of us is wounded. There's no other reason for us to land there. And he's like, "You good?" And I'm like, "Get this guy out of here." And his eyes just become saucers. And he runs around the front, drags this guy out. The medical people are coming out, and they throw him on a gurney and, take him away. And I take off, and now Scott and I are doing this round robin. So we end up doing this. I pulled out 3, Scott pulled out 2 every time we were getting shot at. And later, I don't remember this, but I was told this by Brian. We'll fast forward a little bit. We finally complete all this CASEVAC operations, and Scott wants me to get Brian. I'm like, I can't. Because the Blackhawk finally came out. I'm like, the Blackhawk is in there. I can't get him right now. And he's like, okay, well, I'm getting Brandon. So he comes out. We're together now. The Blackhawk is in there. They end up taking fire. So now, so they're in a hot LZ too. So we do an engagement, Scott and Brandon, just me. And it's a danger close engagement. I'm just by myself. So fortunately, I had someone to follow, and I didn't have to, set it all up 100% by myself. But the notes that I have from, 15 plus years ago, we were shooting about 25 to 30 meters from that Blackhawk. That's really close. And
Wow.
it's close. And so eventually Scott and Brandon ended up departing, because when they went to the FARP to check the aircraft after they got shot, they never were able to get gas, because that's when the CASEVAC started. So Scott is danger low on fuel, and he's like, I got to go back there. I can't. And we're a mile from the FOB, and he's like, I don't have 2 miles left of gas. He's like, I've got to go now. And so now it's just myself, single pilot, single shift, and they want more danger close engagements. And I'm like, okay, here it goes. And, I set it up a little more diligent about it because I'm by myself. There's nobody to follow. It's just me. It's got to be done right. There is no second chance with any engagement, let alone a danger close engagement. There's no second chance. So I do my engagement. Blackhawk ends up, by the way, he only took one wounded out, and we were, the Kiowa team pulled out 5, which is a testament to us. But we were also right there. But it also shows you that there is a little bit of lag to being able to get from us to pass that 9 line to the talk to push it down to the medevac to run out there, the medevac to take off and to get to the place. There's a delay. So that's why we were able to get 5 of the 6 before he even left the airfield. So Blackhawk leaves, I get in there, still getting shot at. Brian gets in, and before he gets in, he just kind of takes a quick look at the cockpit. There's blood on me, there's blood on the flight controls, blood on the instruments, on the windscreen, and guy's a stud. He just gets in, straps in, and we take off, and he starts kind of telling me what had happened. And he's like, you guys were, me too. And he's like, we were all getting shot at. You guys were getting shot at just unmercifully. He's like, I don't know how you guys did get hit. But really what happened was the infantry guys were able to, make sure that those fires were not so accurate. They're accurate enough because they were hitting the dirt around us. I mean, I remember the dirt, kicking up right beside me. And he's like, there was also RPGs being shot at you. And I'm like, I don't remember that. And I'm glad I don't remember that. It probably would scare me. And so, and the rotor disc, and I later was told that one went underneath the rotor disc. Now that could be from perspective as well, but the rotor disc is only 35 foot wide, but in the middle, now it's only 17 and a half feet wide. So that's pretty darn close to have an RPG in my face. And who knows at any, it was a high risk, significantly high risk endeavor that we did. And it goes back to the professionalism of the infantry guys, the crew, and there's nothing wrong with being lucky either, and that we were able to pull that off. But we ended up continuing to fly, did some more engagements. At one point, Glory 6 requested a free fire area, which that basically means, in this defined area, you can do whatever you want. You can shoot whatever you want. You can shoot as many times. You don't have to call me. You don't have to do anything. I've never heard that in my career. Never heard it since either. And so he wanted us to go back, get white phosphorus rockets. So I had 14, Scott had 7. And white phosphorus, it burns everything. It's also really good at making a smoke screen. But he wanted, they had been taking sporadic fire from over there the entire time. And he was like, and then there was all bodies which had suicide vests, and he didn't want his EOD folks to go in there and mess with the vest that might be damaged and, maybe get someone killed. So he's like, I want everything killed in this area. And I'm like, okay. And I would say we met that commander's intent pretty well. Ended up staying on station for another couple hours, make sure they were able to get back on the FOB, did route reconnaissance, convoy security. And in the end, 6 hours of flying, an hour and a half under goggles, probably 90% of all the shots we took were danger close, either to friendlies, to the helicopter, or to the local national homes. And I was so exhausted. The crew chief, the first crew chief that I saw when I landed on the cash pad, that had the eyeballs the size of saucers after he saw what was happening. He literally pulled me out of the cockpit because I couldn't move. I'd only left the cockpit once in 6 hours. That was just relieve myself, and no water, no food, no sleep, and we're just great, cool, end of mission.
Did that 6 hours feel like 3 minutes? Or did it feel like 12 hours?
It felt, I would say for me, it felt like 12 hours. It was long. But when things were happening, such as like being a sitting duck in the LZ, everything moved really slow. I could just see every single dirt kick up, every little pile of dirt that was being, when I was getting shot at. And it was just no big deal. So what am I supposed to do? I can't not continue to operate. And this is what I'm here for. That was the mission I've been waiting my whole life. It's everything I've been waiting for. So finally it happened, and I wasn't going to miss out on that opportunity. And again, I had the right air mission commander in Scott. I had, again, that perfect left seater in Brian, and he was able to continue to operate, and he was a stud. And so end of mission, climb out of the cockpit. Finally, we do a debrief, get some food, get some water, and go to sleep. Well, they grounded Brandon for getting shot in the helmet, even though there's nothing wrong with him. But they were just like, we're taking out the flight schedule for a couple days. And back then, I was like, that's crap, because there's nothing wrong with you. And if you're saying you're good, then you're good. But looking back on this with more experienced eyes as a leader, in a aviation troop, as a senior instructor pilot, I'm like, yeah, that's probably smart. So the next day, like I said, this is August. This is just 2 days of August. I could give you 5 other days in August with just Scott and myself. And the next day, we just get completed with test fire, and which you always do that before you go into your area of operation. And they're like, hey, there's a local national that said they've been attacked, and they're like, and whenever you get these, they're 30 or 40 minutes old. Nothing has happened. By the time you get there, it's over. We get there, and I'm the lead today, and I pop over this little ridge, and there's people everywhere, and they're all armed, and then as they see us, all their weapons go to the ground, and I'm like, okay, not a threat. So I push out, and of course I'm communicating all this to Scott, who's in trail, and we're now doing, orbits, developing our situational awareness, and there's nobody we can talk to because they're all Afghanis. And how they got the report all the way up to the U.S., I'll never know. But they start pointing toward the northeast, and as I'm coming around, Brian, again, he's awesome. Brian's like, I see 2 rooster trails. So there's 2 cars that are driving so fast over unimproved roads that they're like producing like a rooster trail. And I tell this to Scott, I'm like, hey, we're going there. And that's where everybody's pointing. And there's not a threat here, and nothing's happening in this area, so we're going there. And the funny part, as I'm also looking at photos of that engagement, they were only about 5 miles from the Pakistan border. So that'll play, towards the end of this story. But as we're coming up, and there's 2 cars, 2 white Toyota Corollas, and as I'm coming, I got my left seater. I tell Brian to pull out his M4, because we do utilize the M4 from the cockpit as well. And so he's got the M4 on these guys because the Kiowa's weapons don't articulate; they're only straight forward. So if I'm flying, parallel to the car, the weapons are parallel, and so the only thing we can do is pull out an M4 and stick it in their face. Well, where I had positioned myself, Brian was able to count that there were 6 military age males in both cars, so 12. But what I couldn't figure, what he wasn't able to discern was weapons. So I tell Scott, hey, we're coming around again. There's 12 guys in there. We're not murderers. When we kill people, we kill them because they have met the rules of engagement or they have attempted to kill us. So we don't murder anybody over there. And I come back around, and as I'm setting up, going by the car, I'm setting up for Brian to get a good look. Out sticks an RPG, and I just start braking hard, and I'm telling I'm telling Scott, hey, RPG, and Scott, I don't know what's happening because I'm turning away, and Scott's high, and he's doing his engagement, so I can't see any of this. But when I come back around, the southern vehicle had stopped. All those guys were running out like cockroaches, and the north vehicle was still traveling, and Scott was with the north vehicle. I'm like, hey, stay with the north vehicle. I got the south vehicle, and we start setting up for an engagement. Well, I'm a Rocket 50 today, and so I pop up, and I'm just by myself. Scott's way up there, so there's no mutual support. And I pop up, and this gun notoriously was a gun that just wouldn't work. Worked on test fire, so I guess that was the one good time I had.
Oh.
No gun.
My gosh.
So I switch over to the Rockets, and I'm gonna dive. I'm gonna go on a little side note here. Bell Helicopter made an amazing aircraft. It was so simple. To its credit, it was so simple. So if I want to go from one weapon system to the other, I just do my thumb on one switch, and the trigger's the same. The helicopter, I could take off in 2 minutes after starting up. An Apache is going to take you 15 minutes. In terms of contrast, the operational readiness rate for the Kiowa Warriors in its 90 percentile. The Apache's in its 60 or 70 percentile. It's a simple aircraft to maintain, a simple aircraft to fly, and it's cheap. The Army should not gotten rid of it, or they should have upgraded it. But back into the story is I shoot no gun. So I immediately push to the rockets to protect myself. So just some crummy shots, 2 shots, because I only got, once again, we're taking an hour and a half of fuel, 300 rounds of 50 cal, 4 rockets. That's the standard configuration for a normal mission. And so I shoot 2, I break away, come back around, pop up again. I got this guy in my sights. I put a rocket 3 feet from him. The guy, it was like a cartoon where the guy runs through a dust cloud. He like hurdled the dust cloud because the rocket, it was a sandy area. The rocket, these goes through these ballistics, went buried into the ground and then detonated. So all the shrapnel and force was in the dirt. Yeah, produced a little cloud, which he, leaped through. And then I put a rocket right on him, like literally on through him and gone. So now I'm down to no rockets, a 50 cal that doesn't work, so no gun. And Brian's got his gun. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to start coming into hover. You start picking them off with the rifle. And so he's doing that. So goes back to this hovering thing, right? My feet, my hands, everything. And now I'm doing obstacle avoidance because there's bushes and there's trees. And I'm on the radio talking to headquarters to get the QRF Apache spun up to get out here, and then switching radios to get to talking to the infantry guys to start having them come out here and start policing up bodies, weapons, and engaging. And so I'm doing all of this and putting Brian into a position to utilize his M4. He's shooting his M4 out the door. The brass is kicking, off the windscreen and onto my side. My side of the glare shield, which is like the dashboard of your car, it's just getting filled up with brass. And I kept a few. I'm actually looking at one right now. And you can't get a shoulder buttstock with the body armor and seated in your seat and a fight helmet. So as Brian's shooting, the sight they had on his gun keeps like nicking his visor. And he walked out, at the end of the fight, the visor was completely trashed because it just had all these nicks and gouges in it. But he ended up killing 3 of these guys, and we're flying around, and I'm working the gun, trying to get it to work. And finally this thing comes to life. And as it's shooting, I'm just like, I just pedal turn and I cut 2 guys down with from a hover, kind of like Airwolf style. 2 guys from with the hover from the 50 shot machine gun. And I don't think that's ever been done like the CASEVAC. I don't think any of those have been done in Kiowa Warrior history. I'm not saying it hasn't. I don't know of any stories of guys doing that. And then, now the QRF is coming, the ground guys are coming, and Scott's up there working his targets, same type of thing. He's out of munitions. His left seater killed a couple guys. There was a couple other wounded guys, but now you have guys who are in the prone. They're a little bit protected. They have weapons. There's no need to go and engage a stationary target with a moving M4. That's dumb. So we killed 10 of the 12. All we did was contain those 2 guys until the Apaches came on station. We departed. The Apaches took care of that and then destroyed the vehicles. They destroyed the vehicles later. But when we came back after rearm refuel, they had moved all of the weapons and papers and anything like that was beneficial out of the vehicles, and then the vehicles were destroyed. But so we got 10 out of the 12, and that was, like I said, that was just the next day. I mean, that was, you're talking probably from the beginning of the CASEVAC day, the day before, and the end of this mission, you're talking 20, 22 hours. That doesn't happen all the time. It just happened to be that August of 2008 was just something else. But I mean, those are the major highlights in terms of engagements with that Afghanistan trip. But there were many minor, small ones after that, but not nearly as memorable as that. Another engagement, we dropped probably 120 rounds of artillery and a couple bombs on a group of about 100, and took care of business that day as well. I mean, it was just it picks you. You don't.
So that's kind of, it's flowing back to I can see why you have that philosophy that things happen for a reason, right? That all culminated to that.
Right.
All the things led up to that day that you were able to step into that and really do some good, right?
Yeah, I was lucky. I mean, it took some, all those years and just, study, even though study didn't really matter when it came to do the engagements. But knowing that, hey, I can't be, so flat doing an engagement for my rockets because they'll skip off or they won't, or now that beaten zone is really long instead of concentrated on a guy like shooting it into the sand. So all that stuff really played a factor, but little luck in there. And of course, I mean, Scott Cotras, he was an instructor pilot also. He's one of the guys that I kind of emulated later in my career when I became an instructor pilot and taught at Fort Rucker. And I just had a lot of good examples. And when it came to 2008, I had the right crew all the time, whether it was my left seater or the guys, in front of me or behind me, however we were set up that particular day. But I mean, with what Brian did out there, of what I saw was amazing, and then what's later been retold to me was even more amazing. And with all the stuff he was able to do and help me in the cockpit, the hero of that battle was Brian, hands down. After that, we were there for about another 4 months, and came back right before Christmas 2008. And then I stayed at Fort Campbell for another year, and then maybe even just a little less than a year, and I had secured, Kevin Kist had been a significant influencer when it came to getting my slot at the instructor pilot course at Fort Rucker. And then I ended up staying at Fort Rucker and teaching there. So I taught flight school for a couple years. It was a good break. And Stayed there for those 2 years, taught, I don't know, 150 other students who went to war. And I ended up finishing my time at Fort Rucker and did my very best to get back to combat, and it never happened. Um, it's not up to you, the deployment cycle. And then now that I'm becoming more of a senior guy, now I have certain boxes that I have to check for progression in my career. So I was sent here to where I still now live and work, Fort Riley, Kansas. And I became the standardization instructor pilot of, coincidentally, Alpha Troop, but Avenger Troop 16 Cav. And that was I mean, yes, the engagements, absolute highlights of my career, but that job as a duty, that was the best, because I was the senior warrant. I was the guy helping the commander, and I was put into, and this goes lucky, I guess, even though I didn't think it was lucky at the time. My troop, when 16 Cav deployed to Afghanistan, my troop was not. We were the only aviation troop left behind in the entire aviation brigade, but it was a blessing in disguise, because I learned a lot as a senior guy, how to lead, how to manage. And there was things that I would never have got this experiences if I had deployed. And the troop I was put into to help the troop commander, help the troop commander with. The troop had a lot of immature pilots, and the troop commander, he was the best troop commander I ever worked for. He was amazing. Captain Kent Modis, absolute stud. And him and I worked really, really well together. And once we got a couple people moved out, a couple people, one of them particularly who was in a leadership position, needed to be moved because he was kind of a cancer. Once he was moved out and moved on, the troop, with with uh, Captain Monis and myself as a team, we were able to build that unit up. And I would say, you have probably six troops, but three of them are the flight troops. And of the three flight troops, we went from being the worst to being the best by the time I left my time as the standardization instructor pilot. And that's usually about a year to a year and a half time frame in that duty. And I was there for almost 2 years. So I mean, and that's the best job of my life, the best job I ever had. So I was fortunate to be able to do that for almost 2 years.
What a storied career. What a cool story
Okay.
that whole thing is. I think it is.
I think I got lucky. But I'll take it every day and twice on Sunday. And ended up retiring from Fort Riley in 2017, or from the Army out of Fort Riley, and got divorced a little bit before that. And everything works out, happens for a reason. And it's just now I fly helicopter EMS, still helping people, kind of in the same capacity as that CASEVAC day. um never really thought that I would be doing that type of job, or that I would have some sort of prelude to that. But I can't go kill bad guys, so I might as well help good guys. And so now that's what I do, and I just continue to do that. And it's got its own challenges, but it's rewarding.
Looking back on all your time, starting in the Air Force and then ending up in the Army, what's your takeaway for you?
I've thought about this many times. My big takeaway is there's always something greater than you. There's always something more important than you. And I've definitely tell my kids that. I have one kid right now in the Army. He's in the Middle East and doing some work. But there's always something to be able to be given back, because and if you do give that whether it's a small enlistment, or you don't even have to do the military, but you just have to give back to your community one way or the other. But for me, the biggest takeaway was I was part of, and you hear this a lot, but it really is true. I was really part of something much bigger than myself, and I was put around people that you do you do miss the military and what you've done, but you miss the people and the camaraderie. And there's always someone there to help you out, whatever it is. But there's someone to assist you, and their intentions are honest and true. But the biggest takeaway is just that the people and the experiences that I'll hope, as long as I got my wits about me, still be able to fall back on. And I say it a lot of times. I'm like, if I still work out and still run, thinking that maybe the Army will call me back, and it'll be like, if they call me back, you're having dinner on your own. I'm out of here. But that won't happen. But it's just being part of a group that matters, because you don't find that all the time.
Was it a hard adjustment coming back? I mean, I hear that from a lot of guys, just because
Yeah, it was.
you're doing some heavy duty stuff.
It is hard. You know, the wife, whether you're, you know, however that marriage is going, it she has to figure out how she falls in ranking, and now, is she still important or not? Um, and I will sit here and tell you that I was uh, being a pilot was my number one. Being an Army aviator was my number one priority. It didn't mean I was doesn't mean I wasn't there as a dad, but I was probably an extremely absent husband. But any marriage that devises is on both people. But I will take 100% responsibility that that was not a priority, and so it was hard. And coming back, the first time I came back, the boys, my oldest was, because I came back for. Uh, I would say that after the Afghanistan trip, they're a little bit older, more in the toddler age, and so there was definitely some adjustment, because they are like, "Who is this guy?" Um, but that fades with time, with consistency of being around. But I remember I had this tremor in my right hand; it just wouldn't stop, no matter what I would be doing. Um, you couldn't hide it. You can't pick up a soda without, soda shaking out, or coffee, or whatever the situation is. But over time, it took me probably like 5 years, 6 years for that tremor to finally fade away. And now, I don't have that
Hmm.
tremor anymore. But I will tell you that um, and I don't think I'm nearly as stressed as I was, in August of 2008. But when I get stressed, that tremor will come back a little bit, and I think it's my left eye. My left eye will start to twitch, and it's not that I'm not having any sort of flashback of any type, but it's just the stress does certain things to you that you've been. I don't know if you've been rewired, but things have changed, and it's not. I don't really think it's the gunfights. I think it's just the constant pressure, because let's use Vietnam guys had alcohol. We're in the Middle East, we're not allowed to have anything. There's no, and I'm not saying alcohol is the right release, but there is no release whatsoever from that constant threat. You were getting rocketed. The fob is getting rocketed every day, every other day. It interrupts your sleep. It's at a certain point, I'll tell you, at a certain point, none of us, I'm not, in terms of the aviators, none of us, if we were getting rocketed or mortared, none of us went to the shelters, to the bunkers. We just rolled over and continued to try to sleep. We didn't do anything. Like, because if it happens, it happens. Whether it happens in the fob or it happens in the air, it's going to happen one way or the other. I mean, one really crazy story at this fob at Salerno is they had cobra snakes. So, like, you can get bit by one of those, and it doesn't matter if you went to the bunker or not. Hell, you might be in a bunker with a cobra. Who the hell knows? So there's just so many there. Everywhere you turned, there was danger. and you couldn't get away from it. Underneath our tents, we had hard, plywood flooring. You would hear this noise underneath. Well, they had these monitor lids that are like 3 to 5 feet long. One of those get a hold of you, you're done. So like I went everywhere with a headlamp and a pistol. I never went anywhere without a gun. Well, you brought your weapons anyway, but I was ready to utilize a pistol on an animal because I'm like, this is the most dangerous environment I've ever been in. And at the drop of a hat, it doesn't have to be the enemy that's going to hurt me or kill me. And the other side of it is I didn't want to ever be evac'd out because now I've just lost combat time. And I thought I had 3 or 4 more deployments in me. And it ended up being, this is your last deployment.
So are you telling me, I'm getting this sense that you felt more insecure on base than you did when you were in the helicopter?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I'm walking at how fast we walk. I don't know, 3 miles an hour, 5 miles an hour. At least I can zip around in, again, the most maneuverable airframe in the Army. And it's all, of course, an illusion, but I felt like I had more safety and control of my own life in the air. Which goes right back to, I don't know if I said this earlier or not, but I always sat the right seat for 2 reasons. I'm always flying. 2, you can only shoot from the right seat. And the pilot that is on the controls is the first one to maneuver that airframe. The left seater might see something, but as he's talking, now I'm moving. I might not see it, but he is. So it's just this false sense of control that I wanted to make sure I was always in the right seat. But here's the other thing that I learned from Iraq as that junior pilot. I can't start the helicopter. I can barely shoot the weapons and certainly not accurately. Well, now let's say I put my junior pilot in the right seat for that event. Who knows? We might have killed good guys. We might have shot that Black Hawk instead of the bad guys. So it's on me to not only bring my knowledge and my ability to the fight, but also sometimes to keep certain guys, not in a position that they can do harm when, of course, they don't want to. But I was never ever. I was bringing the best Joe Priester to every single fight. I was bringing the best. My call sign was Annihilator 2-3. But you use Annihilator 2-3 whether I'm talking or the left seater's talking. So I'm bringing the best Annihilator 2-3 to every single fight because the ground guys deserve it. Their kids deserve it. Because it matters. It truly matters. And I knew it mattered, but of course, until August 19th, 2008, I didn't really realize how much it mattered. And it does matter. It mattered every second that day.
You echo a lot of things of the helicopter pilots in the Army that I've talked to. You guys were very dedicated to the whole, and it's impressive, honestly.
Well, I mean, I think number one, aviators of my generation stand on the shoulders of giants, the aviators of Vietnam, the guys who created Army aviation before it became its own branch of the Army in 1983. And those guys, they started that. I mean, especially the medevac pilots of Vietnam going in and doing whatever you could.
The dust off guys,
right? The dust off guys are amazing, and Fort Rucker was eventually named Fort Novosel after Mike Novosel, the Medal of Honor recipient, and medal and dust off pilot. But those are the guys that we're just trying to continue their legacy and trying to continue what they established and always be there our motto is above the best. We're not saying we're above other aviators. We're above the best Army in the world. We're above the best infantry guys. That's who we're supporting. And I say to my kid all the time, like, there's only 2 branches of the military: the infantry, special operation guys who are holding land, and everybody else's support of you guys, whether it's me, whether it's the guy working your papers for the next school or the finance guy. So everybody supports one person, the infantry guy. And that's what the Vietnam pilots first instilled. And that is the standard that we're trying to continue to live by and live up to. They're the fathers of Army aviation.
Joe, do you feel like you've dealt with some PTSD through all this?
No, not at all. I actually think I'm really fortunate. My my fiance, she's an RN. I actually met her when I was in the Army, and she is still the head registered nurse at the aviation clinic at Fort Riley. So that's how I met her. We're both on the airfield, and I, go in there sick one day, and that's how I met her. And she's my best friend, thank God. And but no, I don't. She would be the one to tell me. We're around each other all the time. She'd be the one to be like, "Hey, you've got a problem. Figure something out." But no, you know, I'm I I'm extremely lucky. I because I don't have that problem. Um, like August 19th and August 20th, I think about those days every day, but I think of them in a positive, productive way. And what I can, especially as a dad now, what can I take from that, whether my career or that day, and instill into my girls? But what can I tell my kid who's in the Army, who now is maybe not following in my direct footsteps, but someone who needs guidance, especially how to navigate the Army? Be like, hey, this happened to me. This, and be not only a dad but a mentor. But no, I'm very fortunate. I don't feel I have any PTS, and of course you have to do those appointments at the end of every deployment cycle and when you retire. And I'm one of those guys that got the stamp, and out the door I went. So no, I don't see that at all.
That's good. The last thing, they retired the helicopter. They retired the Warrior.
Yeah,
Can you talk
they
about
sure
that?
did. That was it's like, as a cavalryman, because that's what I was. I was in the air cavalry, and it's like shooting your horse. I mean, that's it. That's what else? How else can I explain it? That was my modern day horse, and we had no choice in the matter. And I will tell you that um, infantry company commanders, captains who are now lieutenant colonels, who are now battalion commanders, that was everybody was up in arms about it. But the Kiowa Warrior, in its Delta model fashion, or entity existence, was always an interim aircraft. When I was in flight school, we were told you're going to fly the Comanche in a few years. And the Comanche, the day before the Comanche, if you look up that aircraft, the day before the Comanche was to go into production, they canceled it, and that was supposed to be the next scout attack helicopter. And then there was all these other helicopters that were going to come and replace the Kiowa, and the Kiowa Warrior never got replaced. What happened was the Army took the National Guard Apaches and then bought more drones and thought that that would work. And I tell you what, even before I retired, because they retired the Kiowa, I think 3 or 4 years before I retired. Yeah, 3 years before I retired. There was articles being written about how the Army needs it.
What year was that?
I
That they
think it
retired
was.
the Kiowa?
I think it was 2000. It was 2005. Coincidentally, today is my 11 years ago. Today was my last flight in a Kiowa. So it's kind of funny we're talking about that. And then um, a couple bases retired their units, retired their Kiowas a few years later. So I'm going to say 2017, all Kiowa Warriors were gone. But before I actually retired, and as the Kiowa was being retired, we call that being divested. There was articles being written in defense magazines about how it's a bad choice and we need an actual armed manned scout helicopter. I can't disagree with them, and of course I'm biased, but it's it goes right back to things happen for a reason. I was in my personal life getting divorced, and it was pretty ugly. And if I would have had the ability to go to another airframe, I would have PCS. And how is that going to happen in my life? Things happen for a reason. And now I'm here, and I have an amazing partner, and my kids are 40 minutes away. And I see them almost every single day, probably about every other day, I would say, on average. And it's like, if I would have got a transition to the other airframes, or if they would have had another Kiowa Warrior, a Fox model or something like that, because there was thoughts of a Fox model, who knows where life would be right now. And right now it's just, how often in your life can you say you have no complaints? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm extremely lucky, and good relationships with my kids, because I didn't have another assignment to get. Kids are in Kansas and I'm at North Carolina, Fort Bragg. Well, what kind of relationship am I going to have? There's certain things, and this is, as we all get older, there's certain things that are more important than flying. And I didn't know that early, but things happen for a reason. But
I don't know, flying's flying. It's the best thing you can do with your clothes on, and I love it.
I can I can see your eyes light up when you talk about it. It's pretty awesome.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Well, Joe, thank you so much, man.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity. I mean, you really um, allow me to tell my story, and maybe the kids will watch it and see what their old man did for a bit.
Well, thank you for sharing. Thanks for wow. You've lived a very interesting life, Joe. It's pretty fascinating. It's pretty great.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But again, it's just I'm grateful for the opportunity. I really am.
Thank you for all you did, and thanks for coming on here and talking about it so openly.
Sure.
That's awesome.
Sure. No problem. Thank you.